Part 3. Nyissa. Chapter 23. The earth was still the same. The trees had not changed, nor had the sky. It was still spring, for the seasons had not altered their stately march. But for Belgariad, nothing would ever again be the way that it had been. They rode down through the wood of the Dryads to the banks of the River of the Woods, which marked the southern boundary of Tonedra. And from time to time, as they rode, he caught strange glances from his friends. The looks were speculative, thoughtful, and Dernick, good, solid Dernick, behaved as if he were almost afraid. Only Aunt Paul seemed unchanged, unconcerned. "Don't worry about it, Belgariad," her voice murmured in his mind. "Don't call me that," he replied with an irritated thought. "It's your name," the silent voice said. "You might as well get used to it. Leave me alone." And then the sense of her presence in his mind was gone. It took them several days to reach the sea. The weather remained intermittently cloudy, though it did not rain. A stiff onshore breeze was blowing when they rowed out onto the wide beach at the mouth of the river. The surf boomed against the sand, and whitecaps flecked the tops of the waves. Out beyond the surf, a lean black Kerak warboat swung at anchor, the air above her alive with screeching gulls. Barak pulled his horse in and shaded his eyes. "She looks familiar," he rumbled, peering intently at the narrow ship. Hettar shrugged. "They all look the same to me." "There's all the difference in the world," Barak said. His voice sounded a bit injured. "How would you feel if I said that all the horses looked the same?" "I would think that you were going blind." Barak grinned at him. "It's exactly the same thing," he said. "How do we let them know we're here?" Dernick asked. "They know already. Unless they are drunk, sailors always watch an unfriendly shore very carefully." "Unfriendly?" "Every shore is unfriendly when a Kerak warboat comes in sight. It is some kind of superstition, I think." The ship came about, and her anchor was raised. Her oars came out like long, spidery legs, and she seemed to walk through the froth-topped combers toward the mouth of the river. Barak led the way toward the riverbank, then rowed along the broad flow until he found a spot deep enough so that the ship could be moored next to the shore. The fur-clad sailors who threw Barak a mooring line looked familiar, and the first one who leaped across the riverbank was Greldick, Barak's old friend. "You're a long ways south," Barak said, as if they had only just parted. Greldick shrugged. "I heard you needed a ship. I wasn't doing anything, so I thought I'd come down and see what you were up to." "Did you talk to my cousin?" "Grenig? No. We made the run down from Kotu to the harbor at Tolhob from some Drasnian merchants. I ran into Elteg. You remember him. Black beard, only one eye?" Barak nodded. "He told me that Grenig was paying him to meet you here. I remembered that you and Elteg did not get along very well, so I offered to come down instead." "And he agreed?" "No," Greldick replied, pulling at his beard. "As a matter of fact, he told me to mind my own business." "I'm not surprised. Elteg always was greedy, and Grenig probably offered him a lot of money." More than likely," Greldick grinned. "Elteg didn't say how much, though." "How did you persuade him to change his mind?" "He had some trouble with his ship," Greldick said, with a straight face. "What kind of trouble?" "It seems that one night after he and his crew were all drunk, some scoundrel slipped aboard and chopped down his mast." What is the world coming to?" Barak asked, shaking his head. "My thought exactly," Greldick agreed. "How did he take it?" "Oh, not very well, I'm afraid. When he rode out of the harbor, he sounded as if he was inventing profanities on the spot. You could hear him for quite some distance." He should learn to control his temper. That's the kind of behavior that gives Kerax a bad name in the ports of the world. Greldick nodded soberly and turned toward Aunt Paul. "Milady," he said with a polite bow, "my ship is at your disposal." "Captain," she asked, acknowledging his bow, "how long will it take you to get us to Stithis-Tor?" "Well, it depends on the weather." He squinted at the sky. "Probably 10 days at the most. We picked up fodder for your horses on the way here, but we'll have to stop for water from time to time." "We'd better get started, then." It took a bit of persuading to get the horses aboard the ship, but Hettar managed it without too much difficulty. Then they pushed away from the bank, crossed the bar at the mouth of the river, and reached the open sea. The crew raised the sails, and they quartered the wind down along the grey-green coastline of Nyissa. Gerion went forward to his customary place in the bow of the ship and sat there, staring bleakly out at the tossing sea. The image of the burning man back in the forest filled his mind. There was a firm step behind him and a faint, familiar fragrance. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Well, what is there to talk about?" "Many things," she told him. "You knew I could do that kind of thing, didn't you?" "I suspected it," she said as she sat down beside him. "There were several hints. One can never be sure, though, until it is used for the first time. I have known any number of people who had the capability and just never used it. I wish I never had. I don't see that you really had much choice. Khamdar was your enemy. But did it have to be that way? Did it have to be fire?" "The choice was yours. If fire bothers you so much, don't do it that way next time. There isn't going to be a next time. Not ever." "Belgariad," her voice snapped within his mind. "Stop this foolishness at once. Stop feeling sorry for yourself." "Quit that," he said aloud. "Stay out of my mind. And don't call me Belgariad. You are Belgariad. Like it or not, you will use the power again. Once it has been released, you can never cage it up. You'll get angry, frightened, perhaps excited. And you will use it without even thinking. You can no more choose not to use it than you can choose not to use one of your own hands. The important thing now is to teach you how to control it. We cannot have you blundering through the world, uprooting trees and flattening hills with random thoughts. You must learn to control it and yourself. I did not raise you to let you become a monster. It's too late. I'm already a monster. Didn't you see what I did back there?" "All this self-pity is very tedious, Belgariad," her voice told him in his mind. "I don't think we are getting anywhere." She stood up. "Do try to grow up a little, dear," she said aloud. "It's very hard to instruct someone who is so self-absorbed that he won't listen." "I'll never do it again," he told her defiantly. "Oh, yes, you will, Belgariad. You will learn, and you will practice, and you will develop the discipline this requires. If you don't want to do it willingly, then we will have to do it the other way. Think about it, dear, and make up your mind. But don't take too long. It is too important to be put off." She reached out and gently touched his cheek. Then she turned and walked away. "She's right, you know," the voice in his mind told him. "You stay out of this," Gerion thought. In the days that followed, he avoided Aunt Paul as much as possible, but he could not avoid her eyes. Wherever he went on the narrow ship, he knew that she was watching him, her eyes calm, speculative. Then, at breakfast on the third day out, she looked at his face rather closely, as if noticing something for the first time. "Gerion, you are starting to look shaggy. Why don't you shave?" Gerion blushed furiously and put his fingers to his chin. There were definitely whiskers there, downy, soft, more like fuzz than bristles, but whiskers all the same. "Oh, truly approaching manhood, young Gerion," Manderallen assured him rather approvingly. "The decision doesn't have to be made immediately, Belgariad," Barak said, stroking his own luxuriant red beard. "Let the whiskers grow for a while. If they don't turn out well, he can always shave them off later."
"I think your neutrality in the matter is suspect, Barak," Hetar remarked. "Do not most Charaks wear beards?"
"No razor has ever touched my face," Barak admitted. "But I just don't think it's the sort of thing to rush into. It is very hard to stick whiskers back on if you decide later that you wanted to keep them after all."
"I think they are kind of funny," Tinedra said. Before Garion could stop her, she reached out 2 tiny fingers and tugged the soft down on his chin. He winced and blushed again. "They come off," Aunt Paul ordered firmly. Wordlessly, Dernick went below deck. When he came back, he carried a basin, a chunk of brown-colored soap, a towel, and a fragment of mirror. "It isn't really hard, Garion," he said, putting the things on the table in front of the young man. Then he took a neatly folded razor out of a case at his belt. "Just have to be careful not to cut yourself, that's all. Whole secret is not to rush." "Pay close attention when you are near your nose," Hetar advised. "A man looks very strange without a nose."
The shaving proceeded with a great deal of advice, and on the whole it did not turn out too badly. Most of the bleeding stopped after a few minutes, and aside from the fact that his face felt as if it had been peeled, Garion was quite satisfied with the results. "Much better," Aunt Paul said.
"You'll catch cold in his face now,"
Barak predicted. "Will you stop that?" she told him. The coast of Nyissa slid by on their left, a blank wall of tangled vegetation, festooned with creepers and long tatters of moss. Occasional eddies in the breeze brought the foul reek of the swamps out to the ship. Garion and Tinedra stood together in the prow of the ship, looking toward the jungle. "What are those?" Garion asked, pointing at some large things with legs slithering around on a mud bank along a stream that emptied into the sea. "Crocodiles," Tinedra answered. "What's a crocodile?" "A big lizard." "Are they dangerous?" "Very dangerous. They eat people. Haven't you ever read about them?" "I can't read," Garion admitted without thinking. "What?" "I can't read," Garion repeated. "Nobody ever taught me how." "That is ridiculous." "Well, it's not my fault," he said defensively. She looked at him thoughtfully. She had seemed almost half afraid of him since the meeting with Kamdar, and her insecurity had probably been increased by the fact that, on the whole, she had not treated him very well. Her first assumption, that he was only a servant boy, had gotten their whole relationship off on the wrong foot, but she was far too proud to admit that initial mistake. Garion could almost hear the little wheels clicking around in her head. "Would you like to have me teach you how?" she offered. It was probably the closest thing he'd ever get to an apology from her. "Would it take very long?" "Well, that depends on how clever you are." "When do you think we could start?" She frowned. "I've got a couple of books, but we'll need something to write on." "I don't know that I need to learn how to write. Reading ought to be enough for right now." She laughed. "Yeah, the same thing, you goose." "I didn't know that," Garion said, flushing slightly. "I thought—" He floundered with the whole idea. "I guess I've never really thought about it," he concluded lamely. "What sort of thing do we need to write on?" "Parchment is the best, and a charcoal stick to write with so we could rub it off and write on the parchment again." "I'll go talk to Dernick. He'll be able to think of something." Dernick suggested sailcloth and a charred stick. Within an hour, Garion and Tinedra were sitting in a sheltered spot in the bow of the ship, their heads close together over a square of canvas nailed to a plank. Garion glanced up once and saw Aunt Paul not far away. She was watching the two of them with an indecipherable expression.
Then he lowered his eyes again to the strangely compelling symbols on the canvas. His instruction went on for the next several days. Since his fingers were naturally nimble, he quickly picked up the trick of forming the letters.
No, Zenedra said one afternoon. You have spelled it wrong, used the wrong letters. Your name is Garian, not Belgarian.
He felt a sudden chill, and looked down at the canvas square. The name was spelled out quite clearly. Belgariad. He looked up quickly. Aunt Paul was standing where she usually stood, her eyes on him as always.
"Stay out of my mind,"
he snapped the thought at her.
"Study hard, dear,"
her voice urged him silently.
"Learning of any kind is useful, and you have a great deal to learn. The sooner you get the habit, the better."
Then she smiled, turned, and walked away. The next day, Greldic's ship reached the mouths of the River of the Serpent in central Nyissa, and his men struck the sail and set their oars into the locks along the sides of the ship in preparation for the long pull-up river to Stithistor. Chapter 24. There was no air. It seemed as if the world had suddenly been turned into a vast, reeking pool of stagnant water. The River of the Serpent had 100 mouths, each creeping sluggishly through the jellied muck of the delta, as if reluctant to join the boisterous waves of the sea. The reeds which grew in that vast swamp reached a height of 20 feet, and were as thick as woven fabric. There was a tantalizing sound of a breeze brushing the tops of the reeds, but down among them, all thought or memory of breeze was lost. There was no air. The delta steamed and stank beneath a sun that did not burn so much as boil. Each breath seemed to be half water. Insects rose in clouds from the reeds, and settled in mindless gluttony on every inch of exposed skin, biting, feeding on blood. They were a day and a half among the reeds before they reached the first trees, low, scarcely more than bushes. The main river channel began to take shape as they moved slowly on into the Nyssian heartland. The sailors sweated and swore at their oars, and the ship moved slowly against the current, almost as if she struggled against a tide of thick oil that clung to her like some loathsome glue. The trees grew taller, then immense. Great gnarled roots twisted up out of the ooze along the banks like grotesquely misshapen legs, and trunks vast as castles reached up into the steaming sky. Ropey vines undulated down from the limbs overhead, moving, seeming to writhe, with a kind of vegetable will of their own, in the breathless air. Shaggy tatters of grayish moss descended in 100-foot-long streamers, and the river wound spitefully in great coils that made their journey 10 times as long as it needed to be. "Unpleasant sort of place," Hettar grumbled, dispiritedly looking out over the bow at the weedy surface of the river ahead. He had removed his horsehide jacket and linen undertunic, and his lean torso gleamed with sweat. Like most of them, he was covered with angry welts of insect bites.
"Oh, that is my very thought," Manderallen agreed.
One of the sailors shouted and jumped up, kicking at his oar-handle. Something long, slimy, and boneless had crawled unseen up his oar, seeking his flesh with an eyeless voracity.
"Leech,"
Dernick said with a shudder, as the hideous thing dropped with a wet plop back into the stinking river.
"I've never seen one so big. Must be a foot long or more."
"Probably not a good place for swimming,"
Hettar observed.
"I wasn't considering it,"
Dernick said.
Good.
Aunt Paul, wearing a light linen dress, came out of the cabin beneath the high stern, where Greldick and Barak were taking turns at the tiller. She had been caring for Zenedra, who had drooped and wilted like a flower in the brutal climate of the river.
"Can't you do something?"
Garion demanded of her silently.
"About what?"
she thought back.
"All of this."
He looked around helplessly.
"What do you want me to do?"
drive off the bugs, if nothing else. Why don't you do it yourself, Belgariad? He set his jaw. No. It was almost a silent shout. It isn't really very hard. No. She shrugged and turned away, leaving him seething with frustration. It took them 3 more days to reach Stithistor. The city was embraced in a wide coil of the river, and was built of black stone. The houses and buildings were low, and for the most part were windowless. In the center of the city, a vast pile of buildings rose with strangely shaped spires and domes and terraces, oddly alien-looking. Wharves and jetties poked out into the turbid river, and Greldick guided his ship toward one which was much larger than the rest. "We'll have to stop at customs," he explained. "Inevitably," Dernick said. The exchange at customs was brief. Captain Greldick announced that he was delivering the goods of Redak of Boktor to the Drasnian trade enclave. Then he handed a jingling purse to the shaven-headed customs official, and the ship was allowed to proceed without inspection. "You owe me for that, Barak," Greldick said. "The trip here was out of friendship, but the money's something else again." "Write it down someplace," Barak told him. "I'll take care of it when I get back to Valalon." "If you ever get back to Valalon," Greldick said sourly. "I am sure you'll remember me in your prayers then. I know you pray for me all the time anyway, but now you've got a bit more incentive." "Is every official in the whole world corrupt?" Dernick demanded irritably. "Doesn't anyone do his job the way it's supposed to be done without taking bribes?" "The world would come to an end if one of them did," Hettar replied. "You and I are too simple and honest for these affairs, Dernick. We are better off leaving this kind of thing to others." "Well, it's disgusting, that's all." "That may be true, but I am just as happy that the customs man did not look below decks. We might have had some trouble explaining the horses." The sailors had backed the ship into the river again, and rowed toward a series of substantial wharves. They pulled up beside the outer wharf, shipped their oars, and looped the hawsers around the tar-blackened pilings of a mooring spot. "You can't moor here," a sweaty guard told them from the wharf. "This is for Drasnian ships." "I'll moor any place it suits me," Greldick said shortly. "I'll call out the soldiers," the guard threatened. He took hold of one of their hawsers and pulled out a long knife. "If you cut that rope, friend, I'll come down there and tear off your ears," Greldick warned. "Go ahead and tell him," Barak suggested. "It's too hot for fighting." "My ship is carrying Drasnian goods," Greldick told the guard on the wharf, "belonging to a man named Redak from Boktor, I think." "Oh," the guard said, putting away his knife. "Why didn't you say so in the first place?" "Because I didn't like your attitude. Where do I find the man in charge?" "Droblek. His house is just up that street past the shops. It is the one with the Drasnian emblem on the door." "I've got to talk with him," Greldick said. "Do I need a pass to go off of this wharf? I've heard some strange things about Stithistor." "You can move around inside the enclave," the guard informed him. "You only need a pass if you want to go into the city." Greldick grunted and went below. A moment later he came back with several packets of folded parchment. "Do you want to talk to this official?" he asked Aunt Paul. "Or do you want me to take care of it?" "We had better come along," she decided. "The girl is asleep. Tell your men not to disturb her." Greldick nodded, and spoke briefly to his first mate. The sailors ran a plank across to the wharf, and Greldick led the way ashore. Thick clouds were rolling in overhead, darkening the sun. The street, which ran down to the wharf, was lined on both sides with shops of Drasnian merchants, and Nyissans moved torpidly from shop to shop, stopping now and then to haggle with the sweating shopkeepers. The Nyissan men all wore loose-fitting robes of a light, iridescent fabric, and their heads were all shaved, completely bald. As he walked along behind Aunt Paul, Geryon noticed with a certain distaste that the Nysans wore elaborate makeup on their eyes, and that their lips and cheeks were rouged. Their speech was rasping and sibilant, and they all seemed to affect a lisp. The heavy clouds had by now completely obscured the sky, and the street seemed suddenly dark. A dozen wretched, near-naked men were repairing a section of cobblestones. Their unkempt hair and shaggy beards indicated that they were not Nyssan, and there were shackles and chains attached to their ankles. A brutal-looking Nyssan stood over them with a whip, and the fresh welts and cuts on their bodies spoke mutely of the freedom with which he used it. One of the miserable slaves accidentally dropped an armload of crudely squared-off stones on his foot and opened his mouth with an animal-like howl of pain. With horror, Geryon saw that the slave's tongue had been cut out.
"They reduce men to the level of beasts," Manderallen growled, his eyes burning with a terrible anger. "Why has this cesspool not been cleansed?" "It was once," Beric said grimly, "just after the Nysans assassinated the Raven King. The Alliance came down here and killed every Nysan they could find." "Their numbers appear undiminished," Manderallen said, looking around.
Beric shrugged.
"It was 1,300 years ago. Even a single pair of rats could re-establish their species in that length of time."
Dernick, who was walking beside Geryon, gasped suddenly, and averted his eyes, blushing furiously. A Nyssan lady had just stepped from a litter carried by 8 slaves. The fabric of her pale green gown was so flimsy that it was nearly transparent and left very little to the imagination.
"Don't look at her, Geryon," Dernick whispered hoarsely, still blushing. "She's a wicked woman."
"Oh, I had forgotten about that," Aunt Paul said with a thoughtful frown. "Maybe we should have left Dernick and Geryon on the ship." "Why is she dressed like that?" Geryon asked, watching the nearly nude woman.
"Undressed, you mean?" Dernick's voice was strangled with outrage.
"It is the custom," Aunt Paul explained. "It has to do with the climate. There are some other reasons, of course, but we don't need to go into those just now. All Nysan women dress that way."
Barak and Greldick were watching the woman also, their broad grins appreciative.
"Never mind," Aunt Paul told them firmly. Not far away, a shaven-headed Nysan stood leaning against a wall, staring at his hand and giggling senselessly.
"I can see right through my fingers," he announced in a hissing lisp. "Right through them."
"Drunk?"
Hettar asked. "Not exactly," Aunt Paul answered. "Nysans have a peculiar amusement. Leaves, berries, certain roots. Their perceptions get modified. It's a bit more serious than the common drunkenness one finds among Elorns." Another Nysan shambled by, his gait curiously jerky and his expression blank.
"Doth this condition prevail widely?"
"I have never met a Nysan yet who was not at least partially drugged," Aunt Paul said. "It makes them difficult to talk to. Isn't that the house we're looking for?" She pointed at a solid building across the street. There was an ominous rumble of thunder off to the south as they crossed to the large house. A Drasnian servant in a linen tunic answered their knock, let them into a dimly lighted antechamber, and told them to wait.
"An evil city," Hettar said quietly. "I cannot see why an Elorn in his right mind would come here willingly."
"Money," Captain Greldick replied shortly.
"The Nysan trade is very profitable."
"There are more important things than money,"
Hettar muttered. An enormously fat man came into the dim room.
"More light,"
he snapped at his servant.
"You didn't have to leave them here in the dark."
"You said that the lamps just made it hotter,"
the servant protested in a surly tone.
"I wish you'd make up your mind."
"Never mind what I said, just do as I say."
The climate's making you incoherent, Drublick," the servant noted acidly. He lit several lamps and left the room, muttering to himself.
"Trasnians. They make the world's worst servants," Drublick grumbled. "Shall we get down to business?"
He lowered his vast bulk into a chair. The sweat rolled continually down his face and into the damp collar of his brown silk robe.
"My name is Greldick," the bearded seaman said. "I've just arrived at your wharves with a shipload of goods belonging to the merchant Redek of Boktor."
He presented the folded packets of parchment.
Drublick's eyes narrowed. "I didn't know that Redek was interested in the southern trade. I thought he dealt mostly in Sundaria and Arendia."
Greldick shrugged indifferently.
"I didn't ask him. He pays me to carry his goods in my ship, not to ask questions about his business."
Drublick looked at them all, his sweating face expressionless. Then his fingers moved slightly. "Is everything here what it seems to be?" The Drasnian secret language made his fat fingers suddenly nimble. "Can we speak openly here?" Aunt Paul's fingers replied. Her gestures were stately, somehow archaic. There was a kind of formality to her movements that Garion had not seen in the signs made by others.
"As openly as any place in this pest-hole," Drublick replied.
"You have a strange accent, lady. There's something about it that seems I should remember it." "I learned the language a very long time ago," she replied. "You know who Redek of Boktor really is, of course."
"Naturally," Drublick said aloud. "Everyone knows that. Sometimes he calls himself Ambar of Kotu, when he wants to have dealings that are not, strictly speaking, legitimate."
"Shall we stop fencing with each other, Drublick?" Aunt Paul asked quietly. "I am quite certain you received instructions from King Hrodar by now. All of this dancing about is tiresome."
Drublick's face darkened. "I'm sorry. I'll need a bit more in the way of, verification." "Don't be an idiot, Drublick," Barak rumbled at the fat man. "Use your eyes. You're an Elon. You know who the lady is."
Drublick looked suddenly at Aunt Paul, his eyes going very wide.
"It's not possible," he gasped.
"Would you like to have her prove it to you?"
Hetar suggested. The house shook with a sudden crash of thunder.
No,
Drublick refused hastily, still staring at Aunt Paul.
"It just never occurred to me. I just never—"
He floundered with it. "Have you heard from Prince Keldar or my father?" Aunt Paul asked.
"Your father? You mean, is he involved in this too?"
"Really, Drublick, don't you believe the communications King Hrodar sends you?" Drublick shook his head like a man trying to clear his mind.
"I'm sorry, Lady Belgariad. You surprised me, that's all. It takes a moment to get used to. Why didn't we didn't think that you'd be coming this far south."
"It's obvious, then, that you have not received any word from Keldar or the old man?"
"No, my lady, nothing. Are they supposed to be here?"
"Well, so they said. They were either going to meet us here or send word."
"It's very hard to get messages any place in Nyissa," Drublick explained. "The people here, they're not very, reliable. The prince and your father could be up country, and their messenger could very well have gone astray. I sent a message to a place not 10 leagues from the city once. It took 6 months to arrive. The Nyissan who was carrying it found a certain berry patch along the way. We found him sitting in the middle of the patch, smiling."
Drublick made a sour face.
"There was moss growing on him."
"Dead?" Dernick asked.
Drublick shrugged. "Nope, just very happy. We enjoyed those berries very much. I dismissed him at once, but he didn't seem to mind. For all I know, he's still sitting there."
"How extensive is your network here in Stithistor?" Drublick spread his pudgy hands modestly.
I managed to pick up a bit of information here and there. I've got a few people in the palace and a minor official at the Tonedran embassy. The Tonedrans are very thorough."
He grinned impishly.
"It's cheaper to let them do all the work than buy the information after they've gathered it."
"If you can believe what they tell you," Hitar suggested.
"I never take what they say at face value. The Tonedran ambassador knows that I've bought this man. He tries to trip me up with false leads now and then."
"Does the ambassador know that you know?"
"Of course he does, but he doesn't think that I'm aware of the fact that he knows that I know."
He laughed again.
"It's all terribly complicated, isn't it?" "Most Drasnian games usually are,"
Barak observed.
"Does the name Zadar mean anything to you?"
"I've heard it, naturally."
"Has he been in touch with Salmisra?"
Droblik frowned.
Couldn't say for sure. I haven't heard that he has. But that doesn't mean that he hasn't. This is a murky sort of place, and Salmisra's palace is the murkiest spot in the whole country. You wouldn't believe some of the things that go on there."
"Oh, I believe them, and probably things you have not even begun to guess."
She turned back to the others.
"I think we are at a standstill. We cannot make any kind of move until we hear from Silk and the old wolf."
"Could I offer you my house?"
Droblik asked.
"I think we will stay on board Captain Greldik's ship," she told him. "As you say, Nyissa's a murky place, and I am sure that the Tonedran ambassadors bought a few people in your establishment."
"Naturally. But I know who they are."
"We'd better not chance it. There are several reasons for our avoiding Tonedrans just now. We'll stay aboard the ship and keep out of sight. Let us know as soon as Prince Keldor gets in touch with you."
"Of course. You'll have to wait until the rain lets up, though. Listen to it."
There was the thundering sound of a downpour on the roof overhead. "Will it last long?" Dernick asked.
Droblik shrugged. An hour or so, usually. It rains every afternoon during this season."
"I imagine it helps to cool the air."
Not significantly. Usually it just makes things worse."
He mopped the sweat from his fat face. "How can you live here?" Dernick asked him.
Droblik smiled blandly. "Fat men don't move around all that much. I'm making a great deal of money, and the game I'm playing with the Tonedran ambassador keeps my mind occupied. It's not all that bad, once you get used to it. It helps if I keep telling myself that."
They sat quietly then, listening to the pounding rain. Chapter 25. For the next several days they all remained aboard Greldik's ship, waiting for word from Silk and Mr. Wolf. Tinedda recovered from her indisposition, and appeared on deck wearing a pale-colored dryad tunic, which seemed to Geryon to be only slightly less revealing than the gowns worn by Nyissan women. When he rather stiffly suggested that she ought to put on a few more clothes, however, she merely laughed at him. With a single-mindedness that made him want to grind his teeth, she returned to the task of teaching him to read and write. They sat together in an out-of-the-way spot on deck, poring over a tedious book on Tolnedran diplomacy. The whole business seemed to Geryon to be taking forever, though in fact his mind was very quick, and he was learning surprisingly fast. Tinedra was too thoughtless to compliment him, though she seemed to await his next mistake almost breathlessly, delighting, it seemed, in each opportunity to ridicule him. Her proximity and her light, spicy perfume distracted him as they sat close beside each other, and he perspired as much from their occasional touch of hand or arm or hip as he did from the climate. Because they were both young, she was intolerant, and he was stubborn. The sticky, humid heat made them both short-tempered and irritable, so the lessons erupted into bickering more often than not. When they arose one morning, a black, square-rigged Nyissan ship rocked in the river current at a nearby wharf. A foul, evil kind of reek carried to them from her on the fitful morning breeze. "What is that smell?" Geryon asked one of the sailors.
"Slave,"
the sailor answered grimly, pointing at the Nyissan ship.
"You can smell them 20 miles away, when you're at sea."
Geryon looked at the ugly black ship and shuddered. Barak and Mandralan drifted across the deck and joined Geryon at the rail.
"Looks like a scow,"
Barak said of the Nyissan ship, his voice heavy with contempt. He was stripped to the waist, and his hairy torso ran with sweat. "It's a slave ship," Geryon told him.
"Smells like a open sewer," Barak complained. "A good fire would improve it tremendously." "Sorry trade, my lord Barak," Mandralan said. "Nyissa hath dealt in human misery for untold centuries."
"Is
that a Drastnian wharf?"
Barak asked with narrowed eyes. "No," Geryon answered. "The sailors say that everything on that side is Nyissan."
"That's a shame," Barak growled.
A group of mail-shirted men in black cloaks walked out onto the wharf where the slave ship was moored and stopped near the vessel's stern.
"Uh-oh,"
Barak said.
"Where is Hetar?"
"He's still below. What's the matter?"
"Keep an eye out for him. Those are Murgos."
The shaven-head Nyissan sailors pulled open a hatch on their ship and barked a few rough orders down into the hold. Slowly, a line of dispirited-looking men came up. Each man wore an iron collar, and a long chain fastened them together. Mandralan stiffened and began to swear.
"What's wrong?"
"Erendishmen."
"I had heard of this, but I did not believe it," the knight exclaimed. "Heard of what?"
"An ugly rumor hath persisted in Arindia for some years." Mandralan was answering with his face white with rage. "We are told that some of our nobles have upon occasion enriched themselves by selling their serfs to the Nyissans."
"Looks like it's more than a rumor."
"There," Mandralan growled. "See that crest upon the tunic of that one there? It is the crest of Votaral. I know the Baron of Votaral for a notorious spendthrift, but had not thought him dishonorable. Upon my return to Arindia, I will denounce him publicly."
"What good is that going to do?"
"He will be forced to challenge me. I will prove his villainy upon his body." Barak shrugged.
"Serf or slave? What is the difference?"
"Those men have rights, my lord," Mandralan stated. "Their lord is required to protect them and care for them. The oath of knighthood demands it of us. This vile transaction hath stained the honor of every true Arindish knight. I shall not rest until I have bereft that foul baron of his miserable life."
"Interesting idea. Maybe I'll go with you."
Hetar came up on deck, and Barak moved immediately to his side and began talking quietly to him, holding one of his arms firmly.
"Make them jump around a bit,"
one of the Murgos ordered harshly.
"I want to see how many are lame."
A heavy-shouldered Nyissan uncoiled a long whip and began to flick it deftly at the legs of the chained men. The slaves began to dance feverishly on the wharf beside the slave ship.
"Dog's blood,"
Mandralan swore, and his knuckles turned white as he gripped the railing.
"Easy," Geryon warned. "Aunt Paul says we're supposed to stay pretty much out of sight."
"It cannot be borne," Mandralan cried. The chain that bound the slaves together was old and pitted with rust. When one slave tripped and fell, a link snapped and the man found himself suddenly free. With an agility born of desperation, he rolled quickly to his feet, took 2 quick steps, and plunged off the wharf into the murky waters of the river. "This way, man!" Mandralan called to the swimming slave. The burly Nyissan with the whip laughed harshly and pointed at the escaping slave.
"What?"
he told the Murgos.
"Stop him, you idiot!"
one of the Murgos snapped.
I paid good gold for him.
It's too late.
The Nyssan looked on with an ugly grin.
What?
The swimming man suddenly shrieked and sank out of sight. When he came up again, his face and arms were covered with the slimy, foot-long leeches that infested the river. Screaming, the struggling man tore at the writhing leeches, ripping out chunks of his own flesh in his efforts to pull them off. The Murgos began to laugh. Garion's mind exploded. He gathered himself with an awful concentration, pointed one hand at the wharf just beyond their own ship, and said, "Be there." He felt an enormous surge, as if some vast tide were rushing out of him, and he reeled, almost senseless, against Mandoralin. The sound inside his head was deafening. The slave, still writhing and covered with the oozing leeches, was suddenly lying on the wharf. A wave of exhaustion swept over Garion. If Mandoralin had not caught him, he would have fallen.
"Where did he go?"
Berek demanded, still staring at the turbulent spot on the surface of the river where the slave had been an instant before.
"Did he go under?"
Wordlessly and with a shaking head, Mandoralin pointed at the slave, who lay still weakly struggling on the Drasnian wharf about 20 yards in front of the bow of their ship. Berek looked at the slave, then back at the river. The big men blinked with surprise. A small boat with 4 Nyssans at the oars put out from the other wharf and moved deliberately toward Greldic's ship. A tall Murgo stood in the bow, his scarred face angry.
"You have my property,"
he shouted across the intervening water.
"Return the slave to me at once."
"Why don't you come and claim him, Murgo?"
Berek called back. He released Hatar's arm. The Algar moved to the side of the ship, stopping only to pick up a long boat-hook.
"Will I be unmolested?"
the Murgo asked a bit doubtfully.
"Why don't you come alongside, and we'll discuss it,"
Berek suggested pleasantly.
"You are denying me my rights to my own property,"
the Murgo complained.
"Not at all,"
Berek told him.
"Of course there might be a fine point of law involved here. This wharf is Drasnian territory, and slavery is not legal in Drasnia. Since that's the case, the man's not a slave anymore."
"I'll get my men," the Murgo said. "We'll take a slave by force if we have to."
"I think we'd have to look on that as an invasion of Elorn territory,"
Berek warned, with a great show of regret.
"In the absence of our Drasnian cousins, we would almost be compelled to take steps to defend our wharf for them. What do you think, Mandoralin?"
"Thy perceptions are most acute, my lord," Mandoralin replied. "By common usage, honorable men are morally obliged to defend the territory of kinsmen in their absence."
"There,"
Berek said to the Murgo.
"You see how it is. My friend here is an errand, so he is totally neutral in this matter. I think we'd have to accept his interpretation of the affair."
Greldic's sailors had begun to climb the rigging by now, and they clung to the ropes like great, evil-looking apes, fingering their weapons and grinning at the Murgo.
"There is yet another way,"
the Murgo said ominously. Garion could feel a force beginning to build, and a faint sound seemed to echo inside his mind. He drew himself up, putting his hands on the wooden rail in front of him. He felt a terrible weakness, but he steeled himself and tried to gather his strength. "That's enough of that," Aunt Paul said crisply, coming up on deck with Dernick and Senedra behind her.
"We were merely having a little legal discussion,"
Berek said innocently. "I know what you were doing," she snapped. Her eyes were angry. She looked coldly across the intervening stretch of the river at the Murgo. "You had better leave."
"I have something to retrieve first,"
the man in the boat called back. "I would forget about it."
"We will see,"
he said. He straightened and began muttering as if to himself, his hands moving rapidly in a series of intricate gestures. Garion felt something pushing at him almost like a wind, though the air was completely still. "Oh, be sure you get it right," Aunt Paul advised quietly. "If you forget even the tiniest part of it, it will explode in your face." The man in the boat froze, and a faintly worried frown crossed his face. The secret wind that had been pushing at Geryon stopped. The man began again, his fingers weaving in the air, and his face fixed with concentration. "You do it like this, Grollum," Aunt Paul said. She moved her hand slightly, and Geryon felt a sudden rush, as if the wind pushing at him had turned and begun to blow the other way. The Grollum threw his hands up and reeled back, stumbling and falling into the bottom of his boat. As if he had been given a heavy push, the boat surged backward several yards. The Grollum, half raised, his eyes wide and his face deathly pale. "Return to your master, dog," Aunt Paul said scathingly. "Tell him to beat you for not learning your lessons properly." The Grollum spoke quickly to the Nissans at the oars, and they immediately turned the boat and rowed back toward the slave ship.
"We had a nice little fight brewing there, Polgara. Why did you have to spoil it?" Barak complained.
"Grow up," she ordered bluntly. Then she turned on Geryon, her eyes blazing and the white lock at her brow like a streak of fire. "You idiot! You refuse any kind of instruction, and then you burst out like a raging bull. Have you the slightest conception of what an uproar translocation causes? You have alerted every Grollum in Stithistore to the fact that we are here." "He was dying," Geryon protested, gesturing helplessly at the slave lying on the wharf. "I had to do something. He was dead as soon as he hit the water. Look at him." The slave had stiffened into an arched posture of mortal agony. His head twisted back and his mouth was agape. He was obviously dead. "What happened to him?" Geryon asked, feeling suddenly sick. "The leeches are poisonous. Their bites paralyze their victims so that they can feed on them undisturbed. The bites stopped his heart. You exposed us to the Grollums for the sake of a dead man." "Well, he wasn't dead when I did it," Geryon shouted at her. "He was screaming for help." He was angrier than he had ever been in his life. "He was beyond help." Her voice was cold, even brutal. "What kind of monster are you?" he asked from between clenched teeth. "Don't you have any feelings? You would have just let him die, wouldn't you?" "I don't think this is the time or the place to discuss it." "No. This is the time, right now, Aunt Paul. You're not even human, did you know that? You left being human behind so long ago that you can't even remember where you lost it. You're 3,000 years old. Our whole lives go by while you blink your eyes. We're just an entertainment for you, an hour's diversion. You manipulate us like puppets for your own amusement. Well, I'm tired of being manipulated. You and I are finished." It probably went further than he had intended, but his anger had finally run away with him, and the words seemed to rush out before he could stop them. She looked at him, her face as pale as if he had suddenly struck her. Then she drew herself up. "You stupid boy," she said in a voice that was all the more terrible because it was so quiet. "Finished? You and I? How can you even begin to understand what I have had to do to bring you to this world? You have been my only care for over 1,000 years. I have endured anguish and loss and pain beyond your ability to understand what the words mean. All for you. I have lived in poverty and squalor for hundreds of years at a time, all for you. I gave up a sister I loved more than my life itself, all for you. I have gone through fire and despair worse than a fire 12 times over, all for you. And you think this has all been an entertainment for me? Some idle amusement? You think the kind of care that I have devoted to you for 1,000 years and more comes cheaply? You and I will never be finished, Belgariad. Never.
We will go on together until the end of days, if necessary. We will never be finished. You owe me too much for that."
There was a dreadful silence. The others, shocked by the intensity of Aunt Paul's words, stood staring first at her, and then at Geryon. Without speaking further, she turned and went below decks again. Geryon looked around helplessly, suddenly terribly ashamed and terribly alone.
"I had to do it, didn't I?"
He asked of no one in particular, and not entirely sure exactly what it was that he meant. They all looked at him, but no one answered his question. Chapter 26. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had rolled in again, and the thunder began to rumble off in the distance as the rain swept in to drown the steaming city once more. The afternoon thunderstorms seemed to come at the same time each day, and they had even grown accustomed to it. They all moved below deck and sat sweltering as the rain roared down on the deck above them. Geryon sat stiffly, his back planted against a rough-hewn oak rib of the ship, and watched Aunt Paul, his face set stubbornly, and his eyes unforgiving. She ignored him, and sat talking quietly with Tenedra. Captain Greldick came through the narrow companionway door, his face and beard streaming water. "The Drasnian Droblek is here. He says he got word for you."
"Send him in,"
Beric said. Droblek squeezed his vast bulk through the narrow door. He was totally drenched from the rain, and stood dripping on the floor. He wiped his face.
"It's wet out there," he commented.
"We noticed," Hetar said.
"I've received a message," Droblek told Aunt Paul. "It's from Prince Galdar."
"Finally."
"He and Belgariad are coming downriver," Droblek reported. "As closely as I can make out. They should be here in a few days, a week at the most. The messenger isn't very coherent."
Aunt Paul looked at him inquiringly.
"Fever," Droblek explained. "The man's a Drasnian, so he's reliable. One of my agents at an up-country trading post. But he's picked up on one of the diseases that infest this stinking swamp. He's a little delirious just now. We hope we can break the fever in a day or so and get some sense out of him. I came as soon as I got the general idea of his message. I thought you'd want to know immediately."
"We appreciate your concern."
"I'd have sent a servant, but messages sometimes go astray in Stevie's store, and servants sometimes get things twisted around."
He grinned suddenly.
"That's not the real reason, of course."
Aunt Paul smiled.
"Of course not."
"A fat man tends to stay in one place and let others do his walking around for him. From the tone of King Rotar's message, I gather that this business might be the most important thing happening in the world just now. I wanted to take part in it."
He made a wry face.
"We all lapse into childishness from time to time, I suppose."
"How serious is the condition of the messenger?"
Droblek shrugged.
"Who can say? Half of these pestilential fevers in Nyissa don't even have names, and we can't really tell one from the other. Sometimes people die very quickly from them. Sometimes they linger for weeks. Now and then someone even recovers. About all we can do is make them comfortable and wait to see what happens."
"I'll come at once," Aunt Paul said, rising. "Dernick, would you get me the green bag from our packs? I will need the herbs I have in it."
"It's not always a good idea to expose oneself to some of these fevers, my lady."
"I won't be in any danger. I want to question your messenger closely, and the only way I will be able to get any answers from him is to rid him of his fever."
"Dernick and I can come along,"
Barak offered. She looked at him.
"It doesn't hurt to be on the safe side,"
the big man said, belting on his sword.
"If you wish."
She put on her cloak and turned up the hood. "This may take most of the night," she told Greldick. "There are Grollems about, so have your sailors stay alert. Put a few of the more sober ones on watch."
"Sober, my lady?" Greldick asked innocently.
"I have heard the singing coming from the crew's quarters, Captain. Carracks do not sing unless they are drunk," she said a bit primly. "Keep the lid on your ale-barrel tonight. Shall we go, Droblek?"
"At once, my lady,"
the fat man assented with a sly look at Greldick. Gerion felt a certain relief after they had gone. The strain of maintaining his rancor in Aunt Paul's presence had begun to wear on him. He found himself in a difficult position. The horror and self-loathing which had gnawed at him since he had unleashed the dreadful fire upon Khamdar in the Wood of the Dryads had grown until he could scarcely bear it. He looked forward to each night with dread, for his dreams were always the same. Over and over again he saw Khamdar, his face burned away, pleading, "Master, have mercy." And over again he saw the awful blue flame that had come from his own hand in answer to that agony. The hatred he had carried since Val Aulon had died in that flame. His revenge had been so absolute that there was no possible way he could evade or shift the responsibility for it. His outburst that morning had been directed almost more at himself than at Aunt Paul. He had called her a monster, but it was the monster within himself that he hated. The dreadful catalogue of what she had suffered over uncounted years for him, and the passion with which she had spoken, evidence of the pain his words had caused her, twisted searingly in his mind. He was ashamed, so ashamed that he could not even bear to look into the faces of his friends. He sat alone and vacant-eyed, with Aunt Paul's words thundering over and over in his mind. The rain slackened on the deck above them as the storm passed. Swirling little eddies of raindrops ran across the muddy surface of the river in the fitful wind. The sky began to clear, and the sun sank into the roiling clouds, staining them an angry red. Gerion went up on deck to wrestle alone with his troubled conscience. After a while he heard a light step behind him.
"I suppose that you are proud of yourself?"
Tenedra asked acidly.
"Oh, leave me alone." "I do not think so. I think I want to tell you just exactly how we all felt about your little speech this morning."
"I don't want to hear about it."
"That's too bad. I'm going to tell you anyway."
"I won't listen."
"Oh, yes, you will."
She took him by the arm and turned him around. Her eyes were blazing and her tiny face filled with a huge anger.
"What you did was absolutely inexcusable. Your aunt raised you from a baby. She has been a mother to you."
"My mother is dead."
"The Lady Polgara is the only mother you ever knew. And what did you give her for thanks? You called her a monster. You accused her of not caring."
"I'm not listening to you," Gerion said, knowing that it was childish, even infantile. He put his hands over his ears. The Princess Tenedra always seemed to bring out the worst in him.
"Move your hands," she commanded in a ringing voice. "You are going to hear me, even if I have to scream."
Gerion, afraid that she meant it, took his hands away.
"She carried you when you were a baby,"
Tenedra went on, seeming to know exactly where the sorest spot on Gerion's wounded conscience lay.
"She watched your every step, your first step. She fed you. She watched over you. She held you when you were afraid or hurt. Does that sound like a monster? She watches you all the time. Did you know that? If you even so much as stumble, she almost reaches out to catch you. I've seen her cover you when you were asleep. Does that sound like someone who does not care?"
"You're talking about something you don't understand. Please, just leave me alone."
"Please,"
she repeated mockingly.
"What a strange time for you to remember your manners. I didn't hear you saying please this morning. I didn't hear a single please. I didn't hear any thank you either. Do you know what you are, Gerion? You are a spoiled child, that's what you are."
That did it. To have this pampered, willful little princess call him a spoiled child was more than Geryon could bear. Infuriated, he began to shout at her. Most of what he said was wildly incoherent, but the shouting made him feel better. They started with accusations, but the argument soon degenerated into name-calling. Tinedra was screeching like a Kamar fishwife, and Geryon's voice cracked and warbled between a manly baritone and a boyish tenor. They shook their fingers in each other's faces and shouted. Tinedra stamped her feet, and Geryon waved his arms. All in all, it was a splendid little fight. Geryon felt much better when it was over. Yelling insults at Tinedra was an innocent diversion compared to some of the deadly things he had said to Aunt Paul that morning, and it allowed him to vent his confusion and anger harmlessly. In the end, of course, Tinedra resorted to tears and fled, leaving him feeling more foolish than ashamed. He fumed a bit, muttering a few choice insults he had not had the opportunity to deliver, and then he sighed and leaned pensively on the rail to watch night settling over the dank city. Though he would not have cared to admit it, even to himself, he was grateful to the princess. Their descent into absurdity had cleared his head. Quite clearly now he saw that he owed Aunt Paul an apology. He had lashed out at her out of his own sense of deep-seated guilt, trying somehow to shift the blame to her. Quite obviously there was no way to evade his own responsibility. Having accepted that, he seemed for some reason to feel better. It grew darker. The tropical night was heavy, and the smell of rotting vegetation and stagnant water rolled in and out of the trackless swamps. A vicious little insect crawled down inside his tunic and began to bite him somewhere between his shoulders where he could not reach it. There was absolutely no warning. No sound or lurch of the ship or any hint of danger. His arms were seized from behind, and a wet cloth was pressed firmly over his mouth and nose. He tried to struggle, but the hands holding him were very strong. He tried to twist his head to get his face clear enough to shout for help. The cloth smelled strange, cloying, sickeningly sweet, thick somehow. He began to feel dizzy, and his struggles grew weaker. He made one last effort before the dizziness overcame him, and he sank down into unconsciousness. Chapter 27. They were in a long hallway of some sort. Geryon could see the flagstone floor quite clearly. 3 men were carrying him face down, and his head bobbed and swung on his neck uncomfortably. His mouth was dry, and the thick, sweet smell that had impregnated the cloth they had crushed to his face lingered. He raised his head, trying to look around.
"He's awake,"
the man holding one of his arms said.
"Oh, finally,"
one of the others muttered.
"You held the cloth to his face too long, Isis." "I know what I'm doing," the first one said. "Put him down." "Can you stand?"
Isis asked Geryon. His shaved head was stubbled, and he had a long scar running from his forehead to his chin, directly through the puckered vacancy of an empty eye socket. His belted robe was stained and spotted.
"Get up,"
Isis ordered in a hissing kind of voice. He nudged Geryon with his foot. Geryon struggled to rise. His knees were shaky, and he put his hand on the wall to steady himself. The stones were damp and covered with a kind of mold.
"Bring him,"
Isis told the others. They took Geryon's arms and half-dragged, half-carried him down the damp passageway behind the one-eyed man. When they came out of the corridor, they were in a vaulted area that seemed not so much like a room, but rather a large roofed place. Huge pillars, covered with carvings, supported the soaring ceiling, and small oil lamps hung on long chains from above, or sat on little stone shelves on the pillars. There was a confused sense of movement, as groups of men in varicolored robes drifted from place to place in a kind of languorous stupor.
"You,"
Isis snapped at a plump young man with dreamy eyes.
"Tell Tzadi, the chief eunuch, that we have the boy."
"Tell him yourself," the young man said in a piping voice. "I don't take orders from your kind, Isis."
Isis slapped the plump young man sharply across the face.
"You hit me,"
the plump one wailed, putting his hand to his mouth.
"You made my lip bleed, see?"
He held out his hand to show the blood.
"If you don't do what I tell you to do, I'll cut your fat throat,"
Isis told him in a flat voice.
"I'm going to tell Sadie what you did."
"Go ahead, and as long as you're there, tell him that we've got the boy the Queen wanted."
The plump young man scurried away.
"Eunuchs,"
one of the men holding Gerion's arm spat.
"They have their uses,"
the other said with a coarse laugh.
"Bring the boy,"
Isis ordered.
"Sadie does not like to be kept waiting."
They pulled Gerion across the lighted area. A group of wretched-looking men with unkempt hair and beards sat chained together on the floor.
"Water,"
one of them croaked.
"Please."
He stretched out an imploring hand. Isis stopped to stare at the slave in amazement.
"Why does this one still have its tongue?"
he demanded of the guard who stood over the slaves. The guard shrugged.
"We haven't had time to attend to that yet."
"Take time,"
Isis told him.
"If one of the priests hears it talk, he'll have you questioned. You wouldn't like that."
"I'm not afraid of the priests,"
the guard said, but he looked nervously over his shoulder.
"Be afraid,"
Isis advised him.
"And what are these animals? They're no good to anyone dead."
He started to lead the men holding Gerion through a shadowy area between two pillars, then stopped again.
"Get out of my way,"
he said to something lying in the shadows. Grudgingly, the thing began to move. With revulsion, Gerion realized that it was a large snake.
"Get over there with the others,"
Isis told the snake. He pointed toward a dimly lighted corner where a large mass seemed to be undulating, moving with a kind of sluggish seething. Faintly, Gerion could hear the dry hiss of scales rubbing together. The snake, which had barred their way, flicked a nervous tongue at Isis, then slithered toward the dim corner.
"Someday you're going to get bitten, Isis,"
one of the men warned.
"They don't like being ordered around."
Isis shrugged indifferently and moved on.
"Daddy wants to talk to you,"
the plump young eunuch said spitefully to Isis as they approached a large polished door.
"I told him that you hit me. Maas is with him."
"Good,"
Isis said. He pushed the door open.
"Tzadi,"
he called sharply.
"Tell your friend I'm coming in. I don't want him making any mistakes."
"He knows you, Isis," a voice on the other side of the door said.
"He won't do anything by mistake."
Isis went in and closed the door behind him.
"You can leave now,"
one of the men holding Gerion told the young eunuch. The plump one sniffed.
"I go when Sadie tells me to go."
"And come running when Sadie whistles, too."
"That's between Sadie and me now, isn't it?"
"Bring him in,"
Isis ordered, opening the door again. The two men pushed Gerion into the room.
"We'll wait out here,"
one of them said nervously. Isis laughed harshly, pushed the door shut with his foot, and pulled Gerion to the front of a table where a single oil lamp flickered with a tiny flame that barely held back the darkness. A thin man, with dead-looking eyes, sat at the table, lightly stroking his hairless head with the long fingers of one hand.
"Can you speak, boy?"
he asked Gerion. His voice had a strange contralto quality to it, and his silk robe was a solid crimson, rather than berry-colored.
"Could I have a drink of water?"
Garion asked.
In a minute."
"I'll take my money now, Tzadi,"
Isis said.
"As soon as we're sure this is the right boy."
"Ask it what its name is,"
A hissing whisper said from the darkness behind Garion.
"I will, Mas."
Tzadi looked faintly annoyed at the suggestion.
"I have done this before."
"You're taking too long,"
the whisper said.
"Say your name, boy,"
Tzadi told Garion.
"Darun."
Garion lied quickly.
"I'm really very thirsty." "Do you take me for a fool, Isis? Did you think just any boy would satisfy me?"
"This is the boy you told me to fetch,"
Isis said.
"I can't help it if your information was wrong."
"You say your name is Darun?"
Tzadi asked.
"Yes. I'm the cabin boy on Captain Greldick's ship. Where are we?" "I'll ask the questions, boy,"
Tzadi said.
"It's lying."
The sibilant whisper came from behind Garion.
"I know that, Mas,"
Tzadi replied calmly.
"They always do at first."
"We don't have time for all of this,"
the hiss said.
"Give it, Oret. I need the truth immediately."
"Whatever you say, Mas,"
Tzadi agreed. He rose to his feet and disappeared momentarily into the shadows behind the table. Garion heard a clink, and then the sound of water pouring.
"Remember that this was your idea, Mas. If she becomes angry about it, I don't want to be the one she blames."
"She'll understand, Tzadi."
"Yeah, boy,"
Tzadi offered, coming back into the light and holding out a brown earthenware cup.
No thank you. I guess I'm not really thirsty after all." "You might as well drink it, boy. If you don't, Isis will hold you, and I'll pour it down your throat. It isn't going to hurt you."
"Drink,"
the hissing voice commanded.
"Better do as they say,"
Isis advised. Helplessly, Garion took the cup. The water had a strangely bitter taste and seemed to burn his tongue.
"Much better,"
Tzadi said, resuming his seat behind the table.
"Now, you say your name is Darun?"
"Yes."
"Where are you from, Darun?"
"Sandaria."
"Where exactly in Sandaria?"
"Near Dareen on the north coast."
"What are you doing on a Kerek ship?"
"Captain Greldick's a friend of my father," Garion said. For some reason, he suddenly wanted to explain further. "My father wanted me to learn about ships. He says that being a sailor's better than being a farmer. Captain Greldick agreed to teach me what I'd need to know to be a sailor. He says I'll be good at it because I didn't even get seasick, and I'm not afraid to climb up the ropes that hold the sails in place, and I'm almost strong enough to pull an oar already, and—"
"What did you say your name was, boy?"
"Garion. Darun. Yes, Darun, and—"
"How old are you, Garion?"
15 last Eristide. Aunt Paul says that people who are born on Eristide are very lucky, only I haven't noticed that I'm luckier than—"
"And who is Aunt Paul?"
"She's my aunt. We used to live on Faldor's farm, but Mr. Wolf came, and we—"
"Do people call her something besides Aunt Paul?"
"King Folrak called her Polgara. That was when Captain Brendick took us all to the palace in Sendar. Then we went to King Anhag's palace in Val Alarn, and—"
"Who's Mr. Wolf?"
"My grandfather. They call him Belgarath. I didn't used to believe it, but I guess it has to be true, because one time he—"
And why did you all leave Falda's farm? I don't know why at first, but then I found out that it was because Zadar stole the Orb of Aldur off the pommel of the sword of the Riven King, and we've got to get it back before Zadar can take it to Torak and wake him up and—
This is the boy we want,
the hissing voice whispered. Geryon turned slowly. The room seemed brighter now, as if the tiny flame were putting out more light. In the corner, rearing out of its own coils and with a strangely flattened neck and glowing eyes, was a very large snake.
We can take it to Salmithra now,
the snake hissed. It lowered itself to the floor and crawled across to Geryon. He felt its cold, dry nose touch his leg, and then, though a hidden part of his mind shrieked, he stood, unresisting, as the scaly body slowly mounted his leg and coiled upward until the snake's head reared beside his face, and its flickering tongue touched it.
Be very good, boy,
the snake hissed in his ear.
Very, very good.
The reptile was heavy, and its coils thick and cold. This way, boy, Sadie told Geryon, rising to his feet.
I want my money,
Essus demanded. Oh, Sadie said almost contemptuously. That. It's in the pouch there, on the table. And then he turned and led Geryon from the room. Geryon, the dry voice that had always been in his mind spoke quietly to him. I want you to listen carefully. Don't say anything or let anything show on your face. Just listen to me. Who are you? Geryon asked silently, struggling with the fog in his brain. You know me, the dry voice told him. Now, listen. They have given you something that makes you do what they want you to do. Don't fight against it. Just relax. Don't fight it. But I said things I shouldn't have. That doesn't matter now. Just do as I say. If anything happens, and it starts to get dangerous, don't fight. I'll take care of it. But I can't do it if you're struggling. You have to relax, so that I can do what has to be done. If you suddenly find yourself doing things or saying things you don't understand, don't be afraid and don't try to fight. It won't be them. It will be me. Comforted by this silent reassurance, Geryon walked obediently beside Sadi, the eunuch, while the coils of the snake, Ma'ath, lay heavily about his chest and shoulders, and the bluntly pointed reptilian head rested almost nuzzlingly against his cheek. They entered a large room where the walls were heavily draped and crystal oil lamps hung glittering on silver chains. An enormous stone statue, its upper third lost in the shadows high above, raised its mass titanically at one end of the room, and directly in front of the statue was a low stone platform, carpeted and strewn with cushions. Upon the platform stood a heavy divan that was not quite a chair and not quite a couch. There was a woman on the divan. Her hair was raven black, cascading in loose coils down her back and across her shoulders. About her head was an intricately wrought golden crown, sparkling with jewels. Her gown was white and spun of the filmiest gauze. It did not in any way conceal her body, but rather seemed to be worn only to provide a material to which her jewels and adornments could be attached. Beneath the gauze her skin was almost chalky white, and her face was extraordinarily beautiful. Her eyes were pale, even colorless. A large gold-framed mirror stood on a pedestal at one side of the divan, and the woman lounged at ease, admiring herself in the glass. 24 shaven-headed eunuchs in crimson robes knelt in a cluster to one side of the dais, resting on their haunches and gazing at the woman, and the statue behind her with worshipful adoration. Among the cushions at the side of the divan lolled an indolent, pampered-looking young man, whose head was not shaved. His hair was elaborately curled, his cheeks were rouged, and his eyes were fantastically made up. He wore only the briefest of loincloths, and his expression was bored and sulky. The woman absently ran the fingers of one hand through his curls as she watched herself in the mirror.
"The Queen has visitors,"
one of the kneeling eunuchs announced in a sing-song voice.
"Ah,"
the others chanted in unison.
"Visitors." "Hail, eternal Salmistra,"
Zaidi the eunuch said, prostrating himself before the dais and the pale-eyed woman.
"What is it, Zadi?"
she demanded. Her voice was vibrant and had a strange, dark timbre.
"The boy, my queen,"
Zadi announced, his face still pressed to the floor.
"On your knees, before the serpent queen,"
the snake hissed in Garion's ear. The coils tightened about Garion's body, and he fell to his knees in their sudden, crushing grip.
"Come here, Ma'as,"
Salmisra said to the snake.
"The queen summons the beloved serpent,"
the eunuch intoned.
"Ah,"
said the others. The reptile uncoiled itself from about Garion's body and undulated up to the foot of the divan, reared half of its length above the reclining woman, and then lowered itself upon her body, its thick length curving, fitting itself to her. The blunt head reached up to her face, and she kissed it affectionately. The long forked tongue flickered over her face, and Maas began to whisper sibilantly in her ear. She lay in the embrace of the serpent, listening to its hissing voice, and looking at Garion with heavy-lidded eyes. Then, pushing the reptile aside, the queen rose to her feet and stood over Garion.
"Welcome to the land of the snake people, Belgariad,"
she said in her purring voice. The name, which he had heard only from Aunt Paul before, sent a strange shock through Garion, and he tried to shake the fog from his head.
"Not yet,"
the dry voice in his mind warned him. Salmisra stepped down from the dais, her body moving with a sinuous grace beneath her transparent gown. She took one of Garion's arms and drew him gently to his feet. Then she touched his face lingeringly. Her hand seemed very cold.
"A pretty young man,"
she breathed, almost as if to herself.
"So young, so warm."
Her look seemed somehow hungry. A strange confusion seemed to fill Garion's mind. The bitter drink Zadi had given him still lay on his consciousness like a blanket. Beneath it he felt at once afraid and yet strangely attracted to the queen. Her chalky skin and dead eyes were repellent, yet there was a kind of lush invitation about her, an overripe promise of unspeakable delights. Unconsciously, he took a step backward.
"Don't be afraid, my Belgariad,"
she purred at him.
"I won't hurt you. Not unless you want me to. Your duties here will be very pleasant, and I can teach you things that Belgariad hasn't even dreamed of." "Come away from him, Salmistra,"
the young man on the dais ordered petulantly.
"You know I don't like it when you pay attention to others."
A flicker of annoyance showed on the queen's eyes. She turned and looked rather coldly at the young man.
"What you like or don't like doesn't really concern me anymore, Essia."
"What?" Essia cried incredulously.
"Do as I say at once." "No, Essia. I'll punish you,"
he threatened.
"No,"
she said.
"You won't. That sort of thing doesn't amuse me anymore, and all your pouting and tantrums have begun to grow boring. Leave now."
"Leave?" Esia's eyes bulged in disbelief.
"You're dismissed, Essia."
"Dismissed? But you can't live without me. You said so yourself."
"We all say things that we don't mean sometimes."
The arrogance went out of the young man like water poured from a bucket. He swallowed hard and began to tremble. "When do you want me to come back?" he whined.
"I don't, Essia."
"Never?"
"Never. Now go, and stop making a scene."
"What's to become of me?" he cried. He began to weep, the makeup around his eyes running in grotesque streaks down his face.
"Don't be so tiresome, Essia. Pick up your belongings and leave, now. I have a new consort."
She stepped back up on the dais. "The queen has a chosen consort," the eunuch intoned.
"Ah,"
the others chanted.
"Hail the consort of eternal Salmista, most fortunate of men."
The sobbing young man grabbed up a pink robe and an ornately carved jewel box. He stumbled down from the dais.
"You did this,"
he accused Geryon.
"It's all your fault."
Suddenly, out of the folds of the robe draped over his arm, he pulled a small dagger.
"I'll fix you,"
he screamed, raising the dagger to strike. There was no thought this time, no gathering of will. The surge of force came without warning, pushing Essia away, driving him back. He slashed futilely at the air with his little knife, then the surge was gone. Essia lunged forward again, his eyes insane and his dagger raised. The surge came again, stronger this time. The young man was spun away. He fell, and his dagger clattered across the floor. Salmithra, her eyes ablaze, pointed at the prostrate Essia and snapped her fingers twice. So fast that it seemed almost like an arrow loosed from a bow, a small green snake shot from beneath the divan, its mouth agape and its hiss a kind of snarl. It struck once, hitting Essia on the leg, then slithered quickly to one side and watched with dead eyes. Essia gasped and turned white with horror. He tried to rise, but his legs and arms suddenly sprawled out from under him on the polished stones. He gave one strangled cry, and then the convulsions began. His heels pattered rapidly on the floor, and his arms flailed wildly. His eyes turned vacant and staring, and a green froth shot like a fountain from his mouth. His body arched back, every muscle writhing beneath his skin, and his head began to pound on the floor. He gave one thrashing, convulsive leap, his entire body bounding up from the floor. When he came down, he was dead. Salmithra watched him die, her pale eyes expressionless, incurious, with no hint of anger or regret. "Justice is done," the eunuch announced. "Swift is the justice of the Queen of the Serpent People," the others replied. Chapter 28. There were other things they made him drink, some bitter, some sickeningly sweet, and his mind seemed to sink deeper with each cup he raised to his lips. His eyes began to play strange tricks on him. It seemed somehow that the world had suddenly been drowned, and that all of this was taking place under water. The walls wavered, and the figures of the kneeling eunuchs seemed to sway and undulate like seaweed in the endless wash and eddy of tide and current. The lamps sparkled like jewels, casting out brilliant colors in slow-falling showers. Geryon slumped, all bemused, on the dais near Salmithra's divan, her eyes filled with light and his head washed clean of all thought. There was no sense of time, no desire, no will. He briefly and rather vaguely remembered his friends, but the knowledge that he would never see them again brought only a brief passing regret, a temporary melancholy that was rather pleasant. He even shed one crystal tear over his loss, but the tear landed on his wrist and sparkled with such an unearthly beauty that he lost himself utterly in contemplating it.
"How did he do it?"
the Queen's voice said somewhere behind him. Her voice was so beautifully musical that the sound of it pierced Geryon's very soul.
"It has power,"
Nyssa replied, his serpent voice thrilling Geryon's nerves, vibrating them like the strings of a lute.
"Its power is untried, undirected, but it is very strong. Beware of this one, beloved Salmisra. It can destroy quite by accident.
I will control him,
she said.
Perhaps,
the snake replied.
Sorcery requires will,
Salmisra pointed out.
I will take his away from him. Your blood is cold, Maas, and you have never felt the fires that fill the veins with the taste of Oret, or Atal, or Caldis. Your passions are also cold, and you cannot know how much the body can be used to enslave the will. I'll put his mind to sleep, and then smother his will with love.
Love, Salmisra?
The snake asked, sounding faintly amused.
The term serves us well as any other,
she replied.
Call it appetite if you wish.
That I can understand,
Maas agreed.
But don't underestimate this one, or overestimate your own power. It does not have an ordinary mind. There's something strange about it that I cannot quite penetrate.
We shall see,
she said.
Tzadi,
she called the eunuch.
Yes, my queen. Take the boy. Have him bathed and perfumed. He smells of boats and tar and salt water. I do not like such alien smells. At once, eternal Salmistra.
Geryon was led away to a place where there was warm water. His clothes were taken from him, and he was immersed and soaped and immersed again. Fragrant oils were rubbed into his skin, and a brief loincloth was tied about his waist. Then he was taken quite firmly by the chin, and rouge was applied to his cheeks. It was during this process that he realized that the person painting his face was a woman. Slowly, almost incuriously, he let his eyes move around the bath chamber. He realized then that except for Tzadi, everyone there was female. It seemed that something about that should bother him, something having to do with appearing naked in the presence of women, but he could not exactly remember what it was. When the woman had finished painting his face, Tzadi, the eunuch, took his arm and led him again through the dim, endless corridors, back to the room where Salmisra half lay on her divan beneath the statue, admiring herself in the pedestaled mirror beside her.
Much better,
she said, looking Geryon up and down with a certain appreciation.
He's much more muscular than I thought. Bring him here.
Tzadi led Geryon to the side of the queen's divan, and gently pressed him down onto the cushions where Ethia had lounged. Salmisra reached out with a lingeringly slow hand and brushed her cold fingertips across his face and chest. Her pale eyes seemed to burn, and her lips parted slightly. Geryon's eyes fixed themselves on her pale arm. There was no trace of hair on that white skin.
Smooth,
he said vaguely, struggling to focus on that peculiarity.
Of course, my Belgariad,
she murmured.
Serpents are hairless, and I am the queen of the serpents.
Slowly, puzzled, he raised his eyes to the lustrous black tresses tumbling down across one of her white shoulders.
Only this,
she said, touching the curls with a sensuous kind of vanity.
How?
It's a secret,
she laughed.
Someday, perhaps, I'll show you. Would you like that?
I suppose so.
Tell me, Belgariad, do you think I'm beautiful? I think so. How old would you say I am?
She spread her arms so that he could see her body through the filmy gauze of her gown.
I don't know. Older than I am, but not too old.
A brief flicker of annoyance crossed her face.
Guess,
she ordered somewhat harshly.
30, perhaps?
He decided, confused.
30?
Her voice was stricken. Swiftly she turned to her mirror and examined her face minutely.
You're blind, you idiot,
she snapped, still staring at herself in the glass.
That's not the face of a woman of 30. 23, 25 at the most. Whatever you say,
he agreed.
23,
she stated firmly.
Not a single day over 23.
Of course, he said mildly.
Would you believe that I am nearly 60?
She demanded, her eyes suddenly flint hard.
No,
Garyon denied.
I couldn't believe that. Not 60. What a charming boy you are, Belgariad.
She breathed at him, her glance melting. Her fingers returned to his face, touching, stroking, caressing. Slowly, beneath the pale skin of her naked shoulder and throat, curious patches of color began to appear, a faint mottling of green and purple that seemed to shift and pulsate, growing first quite visible and then fading. Her lips parted again, and her breathing grew faster. The mottling spread down her torso beneath her transparent gown, the colors seeming to writhe beneath her skin. Ma'as crept nearer, his dead eyes suddenly coming awake with a strange adoration. The vivid pattern of his own scaly skin so nearly matched the colors that began to emerge upon the body of the Serpent Queen that when he draped a caressing coil across one of her shoulders, it became impossible to say exactly where lay the boundary between the snake and the woman. Had Garyon not been in a half-stupor, he would have recoiled from the queen. Her colorless eyes and mottled skin seemed reptilian, and her openly lustful expression spoke of some dreadful hunger. Yet there was a curious attraction about her. Helplessly he felt drawn by her blatant sensuality.
"Come closer, my Belgariad," she ordered softly. "I'm not going to hurt you."
Her eyes gloated over her possession of him. Not far from the dais, Tzadi, the eunuch, cleared his throat.
"Divine Queen, the emissary of Tauragus requests a word with you."
"Of Tuchik, you mean?" Talmisra said, looking faintly annoyed. Then a thought seemed to cross her mind, and she smiled maliciously. The mottling of her skin faded.
"Bring the Grolem in,"
she instructed to Tzadi. Tzadi bowed and withdrew to return a moment later with a scar-faced man in the garb of a Murgo.
"Give welcome to the emissary of Tar-Urgas,"
the eunuch chanted. "Welcome," the chorus replied.
"Carefully now,"
the dry voice in his mind said to Garyon.
"That's the one we saw at the harbor."
Garyon looked more carefully at the Murgo, and realized that it was true.
"Hail, eternal Salmisra,"
the Grolem said perfunctorily, bowing first to the queen and then to the statue behind her.
"Tar-Urgas, king of Thaumergos, sends greetings to the spirit of Itha and his handmaiden."
"And are there no greetings from Tuchik, high priest of the Grolems?"
she asked, her eyes bright.
"Of course," the Grolem said, "but those are customarily given in private."
"Is your errand here on behalf of Tar-Urgas or of Tuchik?"
she inquired, turning to examine her reflection in the mirror.
"May we speak in private, your Majesty?"
the Grolem asked.
We are in private.
But he looked around at the kneeling eunuchs in the room.
My body servants, an Nyissan queen is never left alone. You should know that by now.
And that one. The Grolem pointed at Geryon.
He is also a servant, but of a slightly different kind.
The Grolem shrugged. Whatever you wish. I salute you in the name of Tuchik, High Priest of the Grolems and disciple of Tarak.
The handmaiden of Issa salutes Tuchik of Raktol,
she responded formally.
What does the Grolem High Priest want of me?
The boy, Your Majesty.
Which boy is that?
The boy you stole from Belgariad, who now sits at your feet. She laughed scornfully.
Convey my regrets to Tuchik, but that would be impossible.
It is unwise to deny the wishes of Tuchik, the Grolem warned.
It's even more unwise to make demands of Salmisra in her own palace. What is Tuchik prepared to offer for this boy?
His eternal friendship.
What need has this serpent queen of friends?
Gold, then, the Grolem offered with annoyance.
I know the secret of the red gold of Angarak. I do not wish to become a slave to it. Keep your gold, Grolem.
Might I say that the game you play is very dangerous, Your Majesty. You have already made Belgariad your enemy. Can you afford the enmity of Tuchik as well?
I am not afraid of Belgariad, nor of Tuchik,
she answered him. The Queen's bravery is remarkable.
This is beginning to get tiresome. My terms are very simple. Tell Tuchik that I have Torak's enemy, and I will keep him, unless...
She paused. Unless what, Your Highness?
If Tuchik will speak to Torak for me, an agreement might be reached.
What sort of agreement?
I will give the boy to Torak as a wedding gift.
The Grolem blinked.
If Torak will make me his bride and give me immortality, I will deliver Belgariad up to him.
All the world knows that the dragon god of Engarak is bound in slumber, the Grolem objected.
But he will not sleep forever,
Salmisra said flatly.
The priests of Engarak and the sorcerers of Aloria always seem to forget that eternal Salmisra can read the signs in the heavens as clearly as they. The day of Tarak's awakening is at hand. Tell Tuchik that upon the day that I am wed to Tarak, Belgariad will be in his hands. Until that day, the boy is mine.
I shall deliver your message to Tuchik, the Grolem said with a stiff, icy bow.
Leave, then,
she told him with an airy wave of her hand.
So, that's it,
the voice in Geryon's mind said, as the Grolem left.
I should have known, I suppose.
Maas the serpent suddenly raised his head, his great neck flaring and his eyes burning.
Beware,
he hissed.
Of the Grolem?
Salmisra laughed.
I have nothing to fear from him.
Not from the Grolem. That one.
Maas flickered his tongue at Geryon.
Its mind is awake.
That's impossible,
she objected.
Nevertheless, its mind is awake. It has to do, I think, with that metal thing around its neck.
Remove the ornament, then,
she told the snake. Mast lowered his length to the floor and slid around the divan toward Garion.
"Remain very still,"
Garion's inner voice told him.
"Don't try to fight."
Numbly, Garion watched the blunt head draw closer. The snake raised its head, his hood flaring, his nervous tongue darting. Slowly he leaned forward. His nose touched the silver amulet hanging about Garion's neck. There was a bright blue spark as the reptile's head came in contact with the amulet. Garion felt the familiar surge, but tightly controlled now, focused down to a single point. Maas recoiled, and the spark from the amulet leaped out, sizzling through the air, linking the silver disk to the reptile's nose. The snake's eyes began to shrivel and steam poured from his nostrils and his gaping mouth. Then the spark was gone, and the body of the dead snake writhed and twisted convulsively on the polished stone floor of the chamber.
"Maas!"
Salmisra shrieked. The eunuchs scrambled out of the way of the wildly threshing body of the snake.
"My queen,"
a shave-headed functionary gibbered from the door.
"The world is sending—" "What?"
Salmisra tore her eyes from the convulsions of the snake.
"The sun has gone out. Noon is as dark as midnight. The city is gone mad with terror."
Chapter 29. In the tumult which followed that announcement, Garion sat quietly on the cushions beside Salmisra's throne. The quiet voice in his mind, however, was speaking to him rapidly. "Stay very still. Don't say anything, and don't do anything."
"Get my astronomers here immediately,"
Salmisra ordered.
"I want to know why I wasn't warned about this eclipse."
"It's not an eclipse, my queen,"
the bald functionary wailed, groveling on the polished floor not far from the still writhing Maas.
"The dark, it came like a great curtain. It was a moving wall. No wind, no rain, no thunder. It swallowed the sun without a sound."
He began to sob brokenly.
"We shall never see the sun again."
"Stop that, you idiot,"
Salmisra snapped.
"Get on your feet. Tadi, take this babbling fool out of here and go look at the sky. Then come back to me here. I have to know what's going on."
Tadi shook himself almost like a dog coming out of the water, and pulled his fascinated eyes off of the dead fixed grin on the face of Maas. He pulled the blubbering functionary to his feet and led him out of the chamber. Salmisra turned then on Garion.
"How did you do that?"
she demanded, pointing at the twitching form of Maas.
"I don't know,"
he said. His mind was still sunk in a fog. Only the quiet corner where the voice lived was alert.
"Take off the amulet,"
she commanded. Obediently, Garion reached his hands toward the medallion. Suddenly his hands froze. They would not move. He let them fall.
"I can't."
"Take it from him,"
she ordered one of the eunuchs. The man glanced once at the dead snake, then stared at Garion. He shook his head and backed away in fright.
"Do as I say,"
the Snake Queen ordered sharply. From somewhere in the palace came a hollow, reverberating crash. There was the sound of nails screeching out of heavy wood, and the avalanche noise of a wall collapsing. Then, a long way down one of the dim corridors, someone screamed in agony. The dry consciousness in his mind reached out, probing.
"At last,"
it said with obvious relief.
"What's going on out there?"
Salmisra blazed. "Come with me," the voice in Garion's mind said. "I need your help." Garion put his hands under him and started to push himself up. "No, this way." A strange image of separation rose in Garion's mind. Unthinking, he willed the separation and felt himself rising and yet not moving. Suddenly he had no sense of his body, no arms or legs, yet he seemed to move. He saw himself, his own body, sitting stupidly on the cushions at Salmisra's feet. "Hurry," the voice said to him. It was no longer inside his mind, but seemed to be somewhere beside him. A dim shape was there, formless, but somehow very familiar. The fog that had clouded Gerion's wits was gone, and he felt very alert. "Who are you?" he demanded of the shape beside him. "There isn't time to explain. Quickly! We have to lead them back before Salmisra has time to do anything." "Lead who?" "Polgara and Beric." "Aunt Paul? Where is she?" "Come," the voice said urgently. Together, Gerion and the strange presence at his side seemed to waft toward the closed door. They passed through it as if it were no more than insubstantial mist, and emerged in the corridor outside. Then they were flying, soaring down the corridor with no sense of air rushing past or even of movement. A moment later they came out into that vast open hall where Essus had first brought Gerion when they entered the palace. There they stopped, hovering in the air. Aunt Paul, her splendid eyes ablaze and a fiery nimbus about her, strode through the hall. Beside her hulked the great shaggy bear Gerion had seen before. Barac's face seemed vaguely within that bestial head, but there was no humanity in it. The beast's eyes were afire with raging madness, and its mouth gaped horribly. Desperate guards tried to push the bear back with long pikes, but the beast swiped the pikes away and fell upon the guards. Its vast embrace crushed them, and its flailing claws ripped them open. The trail behind Aunt Paul and the bear was littered with maimed bodies and quivering chunks of flesh. The snakes which had lain in the corners were seething across the floor, but as they came into contact with the flaming light which surrounded Aunt Paul, they died, even as Ma'as had died. Methodically, Aunt Paul was blasting down doors with word and gesture. A thick wall barred her way, and she brushed it into rubble, as if it had been made of cobwebs. Barac raged through the dim hall, roaring insanely, destroying everything in his path. A shrieking eunuch tried desperately to climb one of the pillars. The great beast reared up and hooked his claws into the man's back and pulled him down. The shrieks ended abruptly, in a spurt of brains and blood, when the massive jaws closed with a sickening crunch on the eunuch's head. "Polgara!" The presence beside Gerion shouted soundlessly. "This way!" Aunt Paul turned quickly. "Follow us," the presence said. "Hurry!" Then Gerion and that other part of himself were flying back down the corridor toward Salmisra and the semi-conscious body they had recently vacated. Behind them came Aunt Paul and the ravening Barac. Gerion and his strange companion passed again through the heavy closed door. Salmisra, her naked body mottled now with rage rather than lust beneath her transparent gown, stood over the vacant-eyed form on the cushions. "Answer me," she was shouting. "Answer me!" "When we get back," the shapeless presence said, "let me handle things. We have to buy some time." And then they were back. Gerion felt his body shudder briefly, and he was looking out through his own eyes again. The fog, which had benumbed him before, came rushing back. "What?" his lips said, though he had not consciously formed the word. "I said, this is your doing." "Is what my doing?" The voice coming from his lips sounded like his, but there was a subtle difference. "All of it. The darkness. The attack on my palace." "I don't think so. How could I? I'm only a boy." "Don't lie to me, Belgariad. I know who you are. I know what you are. It has to be you. Belgariad himself could not blot out the sun. I warn you, Belgariad. What you have drunk today is death.
Even now the poison in your veins is killing you.
Why did you do that to me?
To keep you. You must have more, or you will die. You must drink what only I can give you, and you must drink every day of your life. You are mine, Belgariad, mine!"
Despairing shrieks came from just outside the door. The Serpent Queen looked up, startled, then she turned to the huge statue behind her, bowed down in a strange ceremonial way, and began to weave her hands through the air in a series of intricate gestures. She started to pronounce an involved formula in a language Garion had never heard before, a language filled with guttural hissings and strange cadences. The heavy door exploded inward, blasted into splinters, and Aunt Paul stood in the shattered doorway, her white lock ablaze, and her eyes dreadful. The great bear at her side roared, his teeth dripping blood, and with tatters of flesh still hanging from his claws. "I have warned you, Salmisra," Aunt Paul spoke in a deadly voice.
"Stop where you are, Belgariad,"
the Queen ordered. She did not turn around, and her fingers continued their sinuous weaving in the air.
"The boy is dying. Nothing can save him if you attack me."
Aunt Paul stopped.
"What have you done?" "Look at him," Salmisra said. "He has drunk Athal and Galdis. Even now there are fires in his veins. He will need more very soon."
Her hands still moved in the air, and her face was fixed in extreme concentration. Her lips began moving again in that guttural hissing.
"Is it true?"
Aunt Paul's voice echoed in Garion's mind.
"It seems to be," the dry voice replied. "They made him drink things, and he seems different now."
Aunt Paul's eyes widened.
"Who are you?" "I've always been here, Belgariad. Didn't you know that?" "Did Garion know?" "He knows that I'm here. He doesn't know what it means." "We can talk about that later," she decided. "Watch very closely. This is what you have to do."
A confused blur of images welled up in Garion's mind.
"Do you understand?" "Of course. I'll show him how." "Can't you do it?" "No, Belgariad. The power is his," the dry voice said, "not mine. Don't worry. He and I understand each other."
Garion felt strangely alone as the two voices spoke together in his mind.
"Garion," the dry voice spoke quietly, "I want you to think about your blood." "My blood?" We're going to change it for a moment." "Why?" "To burn away the poison they gave you. Now concentrate on your blood."
Garion did.
"You want it to be like this."
An image of yellow came into Garion's mind.
"Do you understand?"
"Yes."
"Do it then. Now."
Garion put his fingertips to his chest and willed his blood to change. He suddenly felt as if he were on fire. His heart began to pound, and a heavy sweat burst out all over his body.
"A moment longer,"
the voice said. Garion was dying. His altered blood seared through his veins, and he began to tremble violently. His heart hammered in his chest like a tripping sledge. His eyes went dark, and he began to topple slowly forward. "Now," the voice demanded sharply, "change it back." Then it was over. Garion's heart stuttered and then faltered back to its normal pace. He was exhausted, but the fog in his brain was gone. "It's done, Belgariad," the other Garion said. "You can do what needs doing now." Aunt Paul had watched anxiously, but now her face became dreadfully stern. She walked across the polished floor toward the dais. "Salmisra, turn and look at me." The Queen's hands were raised above her head now,
and the hissing words tumbled from her lips, rising finally to a hoarse shout. Then, far above them, in the shadows near the ceiling, the eyes of the huge statue opened and began to glow a deep emerald fire. A polished jewel on Salmisra's crown began also to burn with the same glow. The statue moved. The sound it made was a kind of ponderous creaking, deafeningly loud. The solid rock from which the huge shape had been hewn bent and flexed as the statue took a step forward, and then another.
"Why did you summon me?"
An enormous voice demanded through stiff, stony lips. The voice reverberated hollowly up from the massive chest.
"Defend thine hand, maiden great Nyissa,"
Salmisra cried, turning to look triumphantly at Aunt Paul.
"This evil sorceress hath invaded thy domain to slay me. Her wicked power is so great that none may withstand her. I am thy promised bride, and I place myself under thy protection."
"Who is this who defiles my temple?"
the statue demanded in a vast roar.
"Who dares to raise her hand against my chosen and beloved?"
The emerald eyes flashed in dreadful wrath. Aunt Paul stood alone in the center of the polished floor, with the vast statue looming above her. Her face was unafraid. "You go too far, Salmisra. This is forbidden." The Serpent Queen laughed scornfully.
"Forbidden? What does your forbidding mean to me? Flee now, or face the wrath of divine Nyissa. Contend, if you will, with a god."
"If I must," Aunt Paul said. She straightened then and spoke in a single word. The roaring in Gerion's mind at that word was overwhelming. Then, suddenly, she began to grow. Foot by foot, she towered up, rising like a tree, expanding, growing gigantic before Gerion's stunned eyes. Within a moment, she faced the great stone god as an equal.
"Pogra,"
the god's voice sounded puzzled.
"Why have you done this?"
"I come in fulfillment of the prophecy, Lord Nyissa," she said. "Thy handmaiden hath betrayed thee and thy brothers."
"It cannot be so. She is my chosen one. Her face is the face of my beloved."
"The face is the same,"
Aunt Paul said.
"but this is not the Salmisra, beloved of Nyissa. 100 Salmisras have served thee in this temple since thy beloved died."
"Died?"
the god said incredulously.
"She lies,"
Salmisra shrieked.
"I am thy beloved, O my lord. Let not her lies turn thee from me. Kill her."
"The prophecy approaches its day," Aunt Paul said. "The boy, at Salmisra's feet, is its fruit. He must be returned to me, or the prophecy will fail."
"Is the day of the prophecy come so soon?"
the god asked.
"It is not soon, Lord Nyissa. It is late. Thy slumber hath encompassed eons." "Lies! All lies!"
Salmisra cried desperately, clinging to the ankle of the huge stone god.
"I must test the truth of this," the god said slowly. "I have slept long and deeply, and now the world comes upon me unaware."
"Destroy her, O my lord,"
Salmisra demanded.
"Her lies are an abomination, a desecration of thy holy presence."
"I will find the truth, Salmisra,"
Nyissa said. Geryon felt a brief, enormous touch upon his mind. Something had brushed him, something so vast that his imagination shuddered back from its immensity. Then the touch moved on. Ah! The sigh came from the floor. The dead snake mass stirred. Ah! Let me sleep, it hissed. In but a moment, Nyissa said. What was your name? I was called Mas. I was counselor and companion to eternal Salmisra. Send me back, Lord. I cannot bear to live again. Is this my beloved Salmisra? Her successor, Mas sighed. Thy beloved priestess died thousands of years ago. Each new Salmisra is chosen because of her resemblance to thy beloved. Ah, Nyissa said with pain in his huge voice. And what was this woman's purpose in removing Belgariad from Polgara's care? She sought alliance with Torak. She thought to trade Belgariad to the Accursed One in exchange for the immortality his embrace would bestow upon her. His embrace? My priestess would submit to the foul embrace of my mad brother? Willingly, Lord, Maas said. It is her nature to seek the embrace of any man or god or beast who passes. A look of repugnance flickered across Issa's stony face. Has it always been so? Always, Lord. The potion which maintains her youth and semblance to thy beloved sets her veins afire with lust. That fire remains unquenched until she dies. Let me go, Lord. The pain. Sleep, Mas, Nyissa granted sorrowfully. Take my thanks with you down into silent death. Mas sighed and sank down again. I, too, will return to slumber. I must not remain, lest my presence rouse Torak to that war which would unmake the world. The great statue stepped back to the spot where it had stood for thousands of years. The deafening creak and groan of flexing rock again filled the huge chamber. Deal with this woman as it pleases thee, Polgara, the stone god said. Only spare her life out of remembrance of my beloved. I will, Lord Nyissa, Aunt Paul said, bowing to the statue. And carry my love to my brother Aldur, the hollow voice said, fading away, even as it spoke. Sleep, Lord, Aunt Paul said. May thy slumber wash away thy grief. No, Salmisra wailed, But the green fire had already died in the statue's eyes, and the jewel on her crown flickered, then went dark. "It is time, Salmisra," Aunt Paul, vast and terrible, announced. "Don't kill me, Belgara," the queen begged, falling to her knees. "Please, don't kill me." "I am not going to kill you, Salmisra," Aunt Paul told her. "I promised Lord Issa that I would spare your life."
"I didn't make any such promise,"
Barak said from the doorway. Geryon looked sharply at his huge friend, dwarfed now by Aunt Paul's immensity. The bear was gone, and in its place the big Kerek stood, sword in hand. "No, Barak, I'm going to solve the problem of Salmisra once and for all." Aunt Paul turned back to the groveling queen. "You will live, Salmisra. You will live for a very long time. Eternally, perhaps." An impossible hope dawned in Salmisra's eyes. Slowly she rose to her feet and looked up at the huge figure rising above her. "Eternally, Belgara?" "But I must change you," Aunt Paul answered. "The poison you have drunk to keep you young and beautiful is slowly killing you. Even now its traces are beginning to show on your face." The queen's hands flew to her cheeks, and she turned quickly to look into her mirror. "You are decaying, Salmisra. Soon you will be ugly and old. The lust which fills you will burn itself out, and you will die. Your blood is too warm. That's the whole problem." "But how?" Salmisra faltered. "A little change," Aunt Paul assured her. "Just a small one, and you will live forever." Geryon could feel the force of her will gathering itself. "I will make you eternal, Salmisra." She raised her hand and spoke a single word. The terrible force of the word shook Geryon like a leaf in the wind. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Salmisra stood fixed with her pale nakedness gleaming through her gown. Then the strange mottling grew more pronounced, and her thighs pressed tightly together. Her face began to shift, to grow more pointed. Her lips disappeared as her mouth spread, and its corners slid up into a fixed reptilian grin. Geryon watched in horror, unable to take his eyes off of the queen. Her gown slid away as her shoulders disappeared, and her arms adhered to her sides. Her body began to elongate, and her legs, grown completely together now, began to loop into coils. Her lustrous hair disappeared, and the last vestiges of humanity faded from her face. Her golden crown, however, remained firmly upon her head. Her tongue flickered as she sank down into the mass of her loops and coils. The hood upon her neck spread as she looked with flat, dead eyes at Aunt Paul, who had somehow, during the queen's transformation, resumed her normal size. "Ascend your throne, Salmisra," Aunt Paul said. The queen's head remained immobile, but her coils looped and mounted the cushioned divan, and the sounds of coil against coil was a dry, dusty rasp. Aunt Paul turned to Sadi, the eunuch. "Behold, the handmaiden of Issa, the queen of the snake people, whose dominion shall endure until the end of days. For she is immortal now, and will reign in Nyissa forever." Sadi's face was ghastly pale, and his eyes bulged wildly. He swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll leave you with your queen, then. I'd prefer to go peacefully, but one way or another, the boy and I are leaving." "I'll send word ahead," Sadi agreed quickly. "No one will try to bar your way?"
"Wise decision," Barak said dryly.
"All hail the Serpent Queen of Nyissa," one of the crimson-robed eunuchs pronounced in a shaking voice, sinking to his knees before the dais. "Praise her," the others responded ritualistically. also kneeling. "Her glory is revealed to us. Worship her." Garion glanced back once as he followed Aunt Paul toward the shattered door. Salmisra lay upon her throne, with her mottled coils redundantly piled, and her hooded head turned toward the mirror. The golden crown sat atop her head, and her flat, serpent eyes regarded her reflection in the glass. There was no expression on her reptile face, so it was impossible to know what she was thinking. Chapter 30. The corridors and vaulted halls of the palace were empty, as Aunt Paul led them from the throne room where the eunuchs knelt, chanting their praises to the Serpent Queen. Sword in hand, Barak stalked grimly through the awful carnage that marked the trail he had left when he had entered. The big man's face was pale, and he frequently averted his eyes from some of the more savagely mutilated corpses that littered their way. When they emerged, they found the streets of Stithistor darker than night, and filled with hysterical crowds wailing in terror. Barak, with a torch he had taken from the palace wall in one hand, and his huge sword in the other, led them into the street. Even in their panic, the Nyissans made way for him.
"What is this, Belgariad?"
he growled over his shoulder, waving the torch slightly, as if to brush the darkness away.
"Is it some kind of sorcery?"
"No, it is not sorcery." Tiny flecks of gray were falling through the torchlight.
"Snow?"
Barak asked incredulously.
No. Ashes.
What is burning?
A mountain. Let's go back to the ship as quickly as we can. There is more danger from this crowd than from any of this. She threw her light cloak about Garion's shoulders and pointed down a street where a few torches bobbed here and there. Let's go that way. The ash began to fall more heavily. It was almost like dirty gray flour, sifting down through the sodden air, and there was a dreadful sulphurous stink to it. By the time they reached the wharves, the absolute darkness had begun to pale. The ash continued to drift down, seeping into the cracks between the cobblestones and gathering in little windrows along the edges of the buildings. Though it was growing lighter, the falling ash, like fog, blotted out everything more than 10 feet away. The wharves were in total chaos. Crowds of Nysans, shrieking and wailing, were trying to climb into boats to flee from the choking ash that sifted with deadly silence down through the damp air. Mad with terror, many even leaped into the deadly water of the river.
"We're not going to be able to get through that mob, Belgariad. Stay here a moment."
He sheathed his sword, jumped up and caught the edge of a low roof. He pulled himself up and stood outlined dimly above them.
"Oh, Greldic!"
he roared in a huge voice that carried even over the noise of the crowd.
"Barak?"
Greldic's voice came back.
"Where are you?" "At the foot of the pier," Barak shouted. "We can't get through the crowd."
"Stay there," Greldic yelled back. "We'll come and get you." After a few moments there was the tramp of heavy feet on the wharf, and the occasional sound of blows. A few cries of pain mingled with the sounds of panic from the crowd. Then Greldic, Mandorallan, and a half-dozen burly sailors armed with clubs strode out of the ashfall, clearing a path with brutal efficiency. "Did you get lost?" Greldic yelled up to Barak. Barak jumped down from the roof.
"We had to stop by the palace,"
he answered shortly.
"We were growing concerned for thy safety, my lady,"
Mandorallan told Aunt Paul, pushing a gibbering Nyssan out of his way.
"Gudurnik returned some hours ago."
We were delayed. Captain, can you get us on board your ship?
Greldic gave her an evil grin.
Let's go, then. As soon as we get on board, it might be a good idea to anchor out in the river a little way. This ash will settle after a while, but these people are going to be hysterical until it's done. Has there been any word from Silk or my father yet?
"Nothing, my lady," Greldic said.
"What is he doing?"
she demanded irritably of no one in particular. Mandorallan drew his broadsword and marched directly into the face of the crowd, neither slowing nor altering his course. The Nissans melted out of his path. The crowd, pressing at the edge of the wharf beside Greldick's ship, was even thicker, and Dernick, Hettar, and the rest of the sailors lined the rail with long boat-hooks, pushing the terror-stricken people away. "Run out the plank!" Greldick shouted as they reached the edge of the wharf.
"Noble captain,"
a bald Nyissan blubbered, clinging to Greldick's fur vest.
"I'll give you 100 gold pieces if you let me aboard your ship."
Disgusted, Greldick pushed him away.
1,000 gold pieces,
the Nyissan promised, clutching Greldick's arm and waving a purse. "Get this baboon off of me," Greldick ordered. One of the sailors rather casually clubbed the Nyissan into insensibility, then bent and yanked the purse from his grip. He opened the purse and poured the coins out into one hand.
3 pieces of silver," he said with disgust. "Oh, the rest is copper."
He turned back and kicked the unconscious man in the stomach. They crossed to the ship, one by one, while Barak and Mandorallan held the crowd back with the threat of massive violence. "Cut the hawsers," Greldick shouted to his men when they were all aboard. The sailors chopped the thick hawsers loose to a great cry of dismay from the Nissans crowding the edge of the wharf. The sluggish current pulled the ship slowly away, and wails and despairing moans followed them as they drifted.
"Geryon," Aunt Paul said, "why don't you go below and put on some decent clothes, and wash that disgusting rouge off your face, then come back up here? I want to talk to you."
Geryon had forgotten how scantily he was dressed, and he flushed slightly, and went quickly below decks. It had grown noticeably lighter when he came back up, dressed again in tunic and hose, but the grey ash still sifted down through the motionless air, making the world around them hazy and coating everything with a heavy layer of fine grit. They had drifted some distance out into the river, and Greldick's sailors had dropped the anchor. The ship swung slowly in the sluggish current.
"Over here, Geryon,"
Aunt Paul called. She was standing near the prow, looking out into the dusty haze. Geryon went to her a little hesitantly, the memory of what had happened at the palace still strong in his mind.
"Sit down, dear. There's something I have to talk to you about." "Yes, ma'am,"
he said, sitting on the bench.
"Geryon,"
she turned to look at him.
"Did anything happen while you were in Salmishra's palace?" "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," she said rather crisply. "You are not going to embarrass us both by making me ask certain questions, are you?"
"Oh," Geryon blushed.
No, nothing like that happened."
He remembered the lush over-ripeness of the queen with a certain regret.
"Good. That was the one thing I was afraid of. You cannot afford to get involved in any of that sort of thing just yet. It has some peculiar effects on one in your rather special circumstances." "I'm not sure that I understand." "You have certain abilities," she told him, "and if you start experimenting with that other thing before they are fully matured, the results can sometimes be a bit unpredictable. It is better not to confuse things at this point." "Maybe it would be better if something had happened, then?" Geryon blurted. "Maybe it would have fixed it so I couldn't hurt people anymore." "I doubt it. Your power's too great to be neutralized so easily. Do you remember what we talked about that day when we left Tulnedra? About instruction?" "I don't need any instruction," he protested, his tone growing sullen. "Yes, you do, and you need it now. Your power is enormous. More power than I've ever seen before, and some of it so complex that I cannot even begin to understand it. You must begin your instruction before something disastrous happens. You are totally out of control, Geryon. If you are really serious about not wanting to hurt people, you should be more than willing to start learning how to keep any accidents from happening." "I don't want to be a sorcerer. All I want to do is to get rid of it. Can't you help me do that?" She shook her head.
No, and I wouldn't, even if I could. You cannot renounce it, my Geryon. It is part of you. Then I'm going to be a monster? Geryon demanded bitterly. I'm going to go around burning people alive or turning them into toads or snakes, and maybe after a while I'll get so used to it that it won't even bother me anymore. I'll live forever like you and Grandfather, but I won't be human anymore. Aunt Paul, I think I'd rather be dead. Can't you reason with him? Her voice inside his head spoke directly to that other awareness. Not at the moment, Belgariad, the dry voice replied. He's too busy wallowing in self-pity. He must learn to control the power he has. I'll keep him out of mischief, the voice promised. I don't think there's much else we can do until Belgariad gets back. He's going through a moral crisis, and we cannot really tamper with him until he works out his own solutions to it. I don't like to see him suffering this way. You are too tender-hearted, Belgariad. He's a sturdy boy, and a bit of suffering won't damage him. Will the two of you stop treating me as if I'm not even here? Geryon demanded angrily. Mistress Paul, Dernick said, coming across the deck to them. I think you had better come quickly. Barak's going to kill himself. He's what? It's something about a curse, Dernick explained. He says he's going to fall on his own sword. That idiot. Where is he? He's back by the stern. Got his sword out, and he won't let anybody near him. Come with me. She started toward the stern, with Geryon and Dernick behind her. We have all experienced better madness, my lord, Manderallen was saying, trying to reason with the big Jerick. It is not a thing of which to be proud, but neither is it a cause for such bleak despair. Barak did not answer, but stood at the very stern of the ship, his eyes blank with horror, and his huge sword weaving in a slow, menacing arc, holding everyone at bay. Aunt Paul walked through the crowd of sailors and directly up to him. Don't try to stop me, Belgariad. She reached out quite calmly and touched the point of his sword with one finger. It is a little dull, she said thoughtfully. Why don't we have Dernick sharpen it? That way it will slip more smoothly between your ribs when you fall on it. Barak looked a bit startled. Have you made all of the necessary arrangements? What arrangements? For the disposal of your body. Really, Barak, I thought you had better manners. A decent man does not burden his friends with that kind of chore. She thought a moment. Burning is customary, I suppose. But the wood here in Nyissa is very soggy. You'd probably smolder for a week or more. I imagine we'll have to settle for just dumping you in the river. The leeches and crayfish should have you stripped to the bone in a day or so. Barak's expression grew hurt. Did you want us to take your sword and shield back to your son? I don't have a son, he answered sullenly. He was obviously not prepared for her brutal practicality. Oh, didn't I tell you? How forgetful of me. What are you talking about? Oh, never mind. It's not important now. Were you just going to fall on your sword, or would you prefer to run up against the mast with the hilt? Either way works rather well. She turned to the sailors. Would you clear a path so the Earl of Trelheim can get a good run at the mast? The sailors stared at her. What did you mean about a son? Barak asked, lowering his sword. It would only unsettle your mind, Barak. You'd probably make a mess of killing yourself if I told you about it. We'd really rather not have you lying around groaning for weeks on end. That sort of thing is so depressing, you know. I want to know what you are talking about. Oh, very well, she said with a great sigh. Your wife Merrill is with child. The result of certain courtesies you exchanged when we visited Val Aulorn, I imagine. She looks like a rising moon at the moment, and your lusty brat is making her life miserable with his kicking. A son? Barak said, his eyes suddenly very wide. Really, Barak, You must learn to pay attention. You'll never make anything of yourself if you keep blundering around with your ears closed like this."
"A son?" he repeated, his sword sliding out of his fingers.
"Oh, now you've dropped it," she chided him. "Pick it up immediately. Let's get on with this. It is very inconsiderate to take all day to kill yourself like this."
"I'm not going to kill myself," he told her indignantly.
"You're not?"
"Of course not,"
he sputtered. And then he saw the faint flicker of a smile playing about the corners of her mouth. He hung his head sheepishly. "You great fool," she said. Then she took hold of his beard with both hands, pulled his head down, and kissed his ash-dusted face soundly. Greldick began to chortle, and Manderallen stepped forward and caught Barak in a rough embrace.
"I rejoice with thee, my friend. My heart soars for thee."
"Bring up the cask," Greldick told the sailors, pounding on his friend's back.
"We'll salute Trelheim's heir with the bright brown ale of timeless Cherrick."
"I expect this will get rowdy now," Aunt Paul said quietly to Geryon. "Come with me." She led the way back toward the ship's prow. "Will she ever change back?" Geryon asked when they were alone again. "What?" "The Queen. Will she ever change back again?" "In time she won't even want to. The shapes we assume begin to dominate our thinking after a while. As the years go by, she'll become more and more a snake and less a woman." Geryon shuddered. "It would have been kinder to have killed her. I promised Lord Issa that I would not." "Was that really the god?" "His spirit," she replied, looking out into the hazy ashfall. "Salmisra infused the statue with Issa's spirit. For a time, at least, the statue was the god. Oh, it's all very complicated." She seemed a bit preoccupied. "Where is he?" She seemed suddenly irritated. "Who?" "Father. He should have been here days ago." They stood together, looking out at the muddy river. Finally, she turned from the railing and brushed at the shoulders of her cloak with distaste. The ash puffed from under her fingers in tiny clouds. "I'm going below," she told him, making a face. "It is just too dirty up here." "I thought you wanted to talk to me." "I don't think you're ready to listen. It will wait." She stepped away and then stopped. "Oh, Geryon." "Yes?" "I would not drink any of that ale the sailors are swilling. After what they made you drink at the palace, it would probably make you sick." "Oh," he agreed, a trifle regretfully. "All right. It is up to you, of course, but I thought you ought to know." Then she turned again and went to the hatch and disappeared down the stairs. Geryon's emotions were turbulent. The entire day had been vastly eventful, and his mind was filled with a welter of confusing images. "Be quiet," the voice in his mind said. "What?" "I'm trying to hear something. Listen." "Listen to what?" "There. Can't you hear it?" Faintly, as if from a very long way off, Geryon seemed to hear a muffled thudding. "What is it?" The voice did not answer, but the amulet about his neck began to throb in time with the distant thudding. Behind him he heard a rush of tiny feet. "Geryon!" He turned just in time to be caught in Sinedra's embrace. "I was so worried about you. Where did you go?" "Some men came on board and grabbed me," he said, trying to untangle himself from her arms. "They took me to the palace." "Oh, how awful. Did you meet the Queen?" Geryon nodded, and then shuddered, remembering the hooded snake lying on the divan looking at itself in the mirror. "What is wrong?" the girl asked. "A lot of things happened. Some of them weren't very pleasant." Somewhere at the back of his awareness the thudding continued. "Do you mean they tortured you?" Sinedra asked, her eyes growing very wide. "No, nothing like that." Well, what happened? Tell me.
He knew that she would not leave him alone until he did, so he described what had happened as best as he could. The throbbing sound seemed to grow louder while he talked, and his right palm began to tingle. He rubbed at it absently.
"Oh, absolutely dreadful," Tinidra said, after he had finished. "Weren't you terrified?"
"Not really," he told her, still scratching at his palm.
"Most of the time the things they made me drink made my head so foggy I couldn't feel anything." "Did you really kill Maas? Just like that?"
She snapped her tiny fingers.
"Well, it wasn't exactly just like that," he tried to explain. "There was a little more to it." "I knew you were a sorcerer. I told you that you were that day at the pool, you remember?" "I don't want to be. I didn't ask to be." "I did not ask to be a princess either."
"But that's not the same thing. Being a king or a princess is what one is. Being a sorcerer has to do with what one does."
"I really don't see that much difference," she objected stubbornly.
"I can make things happen. Awful things, usually."
"So?"
she said maddeningly.
"I can make awful things happen, too. Or at least I could back in Tolhanath. One word from me could have sent a servant to the whipping post, or to the headsman's block. I didn't do it, of course, but I could have. Power is power, Garion. The results are the same. You don't have to hurt people if you don't want to."
"It just happens sometimes. It's not that I want to do it." The throbbing had become a nagging thing, almost like a dull headache.
"Well, then you have to learn to control it."
"And now you sound like Aunt Paul."
"She is trying to help you. She keeps trying to get you to do what you're going to have to do eventually anyway. How many more people are you going to have to burn up before you finally accept what she says?"
"You didn't have to say that." Garion was stung deeply by her words.
"Yes," she told him. "I think I did. You're lucky I'm not your aunt. I wouldn't put up with your foolishness the way Lady Belgariad does."
"But you don't understand," Garion muttered sullenly.
"I understand much better than you think, Garion. You know what your problem is? You don't want to grow up. You want to keep on being a boy forever. You can't, though. Nobody can. No matter how much power you have. Whether you are an emperor or a sorcerer, you cannot stop the years from going by. I realized that a long time ago, but then I'm probably much smarter than you are."
Then, without any word of explanation, she raised up on her toes and kissed him lightly full on the lips. Garion blushed and lowered his head in embarrassment.
"Tell me,"
Tinidra said, toying with the sleeve of his tunic.
"Was Queen Salmisra as beautiful as they say?"
"She was the most beautiful woman I've ever seen in my life," Garion answered without thinking. The princess caught her breath sharply.
"I hate you,"
she cried from between clenched teeth. Then she turned and ran sobbing in search of Aunt Paul. Garion stared after her in perplexity. He turned then to stare moodily out at the river and the drifting ash. The tingling in his palm was becoming intolerable, and he scratched at it, digging it with his fingernails.
"You'll just make it sore,"
the voice in his mind said.
"It itches. I can't stand it."
"Stop being a baby."
"But what's causing it?"
"Do you mean to say you really don't know?"
"Well, you've got further to go than I thought.
Put your right hand on the amulet."
"Why?"
"Just do it, Garion." Garion reached inside his tunic and put his burning palm on his medallion. As a key fitting into the lock for which it was made, the contact between his hand and the throbbing amulet seemed somehow enormously right. The tingling became that now familiar surge, and the throbbing began to echo hollowly in his ears.
"Not too much," the voice warned him. "You're not trying to dry up the river, you know."
"What's happening? What is all of this?"
"Belgariad's trying to find us."
"Grandfather? Where?"
"Be patient."
The throbbing seemed to grow louder, until Garion's entire body quivered with each thudding beat. He stared out over the rail, trying to see through the haze.
The settling ash, so light that it coated the muddy surface of the river, made everything more than 20 paces away indistinct. It was impossible to see the city, and the wails and cries from the hidden streets seemed somehow muffled. Only the slow wash of the current against the hull seemed clear. Then, a long way out on the river, something moved. It was not very large, and seemed to be little more than a dark shadow, ghosting silently with the current. The throbbing grew even louder. The shadow drew closer, and Geryon could just begin to make out the shape of a small boat. An oar caught the surface of the water with a small splash. The man at the oars turned to look over his shoulder. It was Silk. His face was covered with gray ash, and tiny rivulets of sweat streaked his cheeks. Mr. Wolf sat in the stern of the little boat, muffled in his cloak, and with his hood turned up.
"Welcome back, Belgariad,"
the dry voice said.
"Who's that?"
Wolf's voice in Geryon's mind sounded startled.
"Is that you, Belgariad?"
"Not quite," the voice replied. "Not yet, anyway.
But we are getting closer."
"I wondered who was making all of that noise."
He overdoes things sometimes. He will learn eventually."
A shout came from one of the sailors clustered around Barak at the stern, and they all turned to watch the small boat drifting toward them. Aunt Paul came up from below and stepped to the rail.
"You're late,"
she called.
"Something came up,"
the old man answered across the narrowing gap. He pushed back his hood and shook the floury ash out of his cloak. Then Geryon saw that the old man's left arm was bound up in a dirty sling across the front of his body.
"What happened to your arm?"
Aunt Paul asked.
"I'd rather not talk about it."
There was an ugly scratch running down one of Wolf's cheeks into his short white beard, and his eyes seemed to glitter with some huge irritation. The grin on Silk's ash-coated face was malicious, as he dipped his oars once, deftly pulling the little boat in beside Greldick's ship with a slight thump.
"I don't imagine you can be persuaded to keep your mouth shut,"
Wolf said irritably to the small man. "Would I say anything, mighty sorcerer?" Silk asked mockingly, his ferret eyes wide with feigned innocence.
"Just help me aboard,"
Wolf told him, his voice testy. His entire bearing was that of a man who had been mortally insulted. "Yes, whatever you say, ancient Belgariad," Silk said, obviously trying to keep from laughing. He steadied Wolf as the old man awkwardly climbed over the ship's rail.
"Let's get out of here,"
Mr. Wolf curtly told Captain Greldick, who had just joined them.
"Which way, ancient one?"
Greldick asked carefully, clearly not wanting to aggravate the old man further. Wolf stared hard at him.
"Upstream or down?"
Greldick explained mollifyingly.
"Upstream, of course,"
Wolf snapped.
"How was I supposed to know?"
Greldick appealed to Aunt Paul. Then he turned and crossly began barking orders to his sailors. Aunt Paul's expression was a peculiar mixture of relief and curiosity.
"I'm sure your story's going to be absolutely fascinating, Father," she said, as the sailors began raising the heavy anchors. "I simply can't wait to hear it."
"I can do without the sarcasm, Paul. I've had a very bad day. Try not to make it any worse."
That last was finally too much for Silk. The little man, in the act of climbing across the rail, suddenly collapsed in a helpless glee. He tumbled forward to the deck, howling with laughter. Mr. Wolf glared at his laughing companion with a profoundly affronted expression as Greldick's sailors ran out their oars and began turning the ship in the sluggish current.
"What happened to your arm, Father?"
Aunt Paul's gaze was penetrating, and her tone said quite clearly that she did not intend to be put off any longer.
"I broke it,"
Wolf told her flatly.
"How did you manage that?"
"It was just a stupid accident, Paul. Those things happen sometimes."
"Let me see it."
"In a minute."
He scowled at Silk, who was still laughing.
"Will you stop that? Go tell the sailors where we are going."
"And where are we going, Father?"
Aunt Paul asked him. Did you find Zidar's trail?
He crossed into Trelmergos. Tukchik was waiting for him.
And the orb?
Tukchik's got it now.
Are we going to be able to cut him off before he gets to Raktal with it?
I doubt it. Anyway, we have to go to the Vale first.
The Vale, Father? But you're not making any sense.
Our master has summoned us, Paul. He wants us at the Vale, so that's where we are going.
What about the orb?
Tukchik's got it. And I know where to find Tukchik. He's not going anyplace. For right now, we're going to the Vale.
All right, Father, she concurred placatingly. Don't excite yourself.
She looked at him closely.
Have you been fighting, Father?
She asked dangerously.
No, I haven't been fighting.
He sounded disgusted.
Well, what happened then?
A tree fell on me.
What?
You heard me.
Silk exploded into fresh howls of mirth at the old man's grudging confession. From the stern of the ship, where Greldick and Barak stood at the tiller, the slow beat of the drum began, and the sailors dug in with their oars. The ship slid through the oily water, moving upstream against the current, with Silk's laughter trailing behind in the ash-laden air. Here ends Book 2 of the Belgariad. Book 3, Magician's Gambit, carries the quest on to the orb through stranger lands and darker magic, while Garion begins to learn the incredible power of the dry voice within his mind.